Please note, in order to comply with YouTube policy, this free version of the audiobook has bedroom scenes redacted. If you would like to read the full text, please get the ebook or print version of the story. Tyler. I think I understand why Cain killed his brother Abel in the Bible story about the first murder. Don't get me wrong, his reaction was extreme, but it can be infuriating to constantly be bested by your sibling. Believe me, I know from first-hand experience. Even though it was many years ago, I vividly remember learning the story about the first brothers. Nana Janice had insisted we go to a fancy summer Bible school camp offered through her church. None of the parables we heard resonated with me quite like the one of Cain and Abel. While the other children recoiled at the idea of the first murder, I nodded my head because I saw where Cain was coming from. Everyone wanted to place the sole blame on Cain and say what a horrible person he was, without questioning why God preferred Abel's sacrifice to Cain's. Had Cain toiled tirelessly to till the soil and provide his best produce as an offering to his father? If so, it seemed like he had every right to be frustrated. Maybe not to the point of murder, but we don't know what drove him to that extreme. When I asked our camp counselor, Miss Tilly, if Cain might have been justified in his anger, her face turned pale white and she blustered in response to my inquiries. Even at the tender age of 8, I could tell that she didn't appreciate my line of questioning. I suppose it didn't dawn on her that I saw the way she beamed at Tristan and glared at me. I might have been young, but I was already used to people preferring my brother. He was the golden child, and I was his inferior identical twin brother. It wasn't lost on me that we were supposed to be identical. I share his genes, so I should be as smart, strong, fast, funny, cute, engaging, and charming as him. Unfortunately, I'm not. It doesn't take long after meeting us for others to sense my inferiority to my brother. People are naturally drawn to Tristan from the instant they meet him. They don't have that magnetic reaction to me. For the most part, I'm fine with the difference in how we're treated. It's not Tristan's fault he is so charismatic. It's just the way things are. Over the years I have gotten used to it and managed to accept my role of living life in Tristan's shadow. Deep down I hold on to the hope that someday someone will choose me over him, but I try to keep that wish firmly tamped down in my subconscious. Our parents work hard to keep things equal between us and to make sure I feel treasured. If anything, they have always coddled me a little more than Tristan because they see the differences in how others treat us. They aren't to blame for their son's vastly different social statuses. It's just the way things worked out. Despite how much I have tried to change it, I fear that it is the way things will always be. My emotional reaction has matured from denial and anger into begrudging acceptance. People are simply drawn to Tristan like he's a mesmerizing sparkler. With me it's more of a slow burn, very slow. I kept telling myself that it was better to have a few close friends than a bunch of acquaintances. High school made remembering that difficult. Tristan was the all-star quarterback with girls falling over themselves to get near him. He was constantly in the center of a circle of his teammates and adoring fans. I almost needed to make an appointment if I wanted to speak with him, which I usually didn't bother to do. He didn't seem to notice my distance. He had too much going on to take note of his twin brother's absence from his social calendar. It wasn't that he disliked me or insulted me. He just didn't seem to see or care about the lack of me. I wasn't on his social radar, which was fine by me. It was easier to not be near him. When I was in his vicinity, I was inevitably compared to him, and I always came up short. We had settled into and accepted our roles as the golden boy and his shadow. Things were calm and predictable. I might not have liked it, but I understood our hierarchy. It made sense until she came. Alexis Bell arrived in our calm, pristine lakeside town and changed everything. I'll never forget the first time I saw her. Lexi was frolicking on the beach with her little sister. They were building an elaborate sand castle, even though they were both too old to be playing in the sand. I was a good distance away, but her beauty still took my breath away. I stood mesmerized as the wind whipped her sun-kissed blonde hair around her face. My feet were frozen in place as I stared at her, trying to figure out if she was real. She cupped a hand over her forehead to block the bright sunlight as she looked in my direction. Lifting her other hand, she gave me a friendly wave. It took a moment for me to register that her gesture was aimed in my direction. My heart raced and my palms immediately dampened as I slowly raised my own arm to wave back. It was shocking yet exhilarating that this teen beach goddess had waved at me. Forcing my legs into motion, I moved in her direction. I was determined not to blow this moment. When I got closer to her, I was delighted to discover that she was even more beautiful up close than my mind had imagined her to be from a distance. The beach sun had turned her skin a deep golden tan. Her cheeks were flushed a pretty pink. I couldn't be sure if it was from the heat or my approach. I stopped awkwardly when I got as close as I dared. The last thing I wanted was to scare her off.
"Hi,"
she said. Her voice was enthusiastic and friendly. The sun glistened on her shiny lip gloss, making her lips look wet and utterly kissable. I couldn't help but stare. "Hi," I responded, trying to insert flirtation into my tone but falling flat. I looked down at my feet and kicked at the sand, trying to think of something witty and charming to say. She smelled like strawberries and sunshine. I was drumming up the courage to tell her that when my spine stiffened. I felt him before I heard or saw him. It was some sort of annoying sixth sense about my twin. I could tell the moment she noticed him. Her bright blue eyes were drawn to him like a magnet. They looked right past me over my shoulder and straight to Tristan. "Well, hi there," my brother said as he joined us. His voice somehow held just the right amount of friendly flirtatiousness to draw and hold her attention. "I'm Tristan," he told her, beaming a brilliant smile in her direction. She looked utterly dazzled by him. I couldn't do anything but stare. This couldn't be happening, not with this girl. Why did he have to come along and ruin everything? Not taking note of my distress, Tristan waved a casual hand in my direction. "I take it you've met my brother Tyler." Barely even taking a moment to glance in my direction before gazing back at Tristan, she nodded and said,
"I'm Lexi and this is my little sister, Sarah."
She thumbed the mousy girl standing behind her without tearing her eyes off Tristan. "Sarah," Tristan nodded and winked at the younger girl, making her giggle. I felt frozen. I knew that I needed to jump in before Tristan stole Lexi, but I was at a loss for what to say. Without missing a beat, Tristan took Lexi's hand and lifted it to his lips. "Lexi," he let her name roll off his tongue. To say she was charmed would be putting it mildly. I was horrified to be standing there like a mute statue, watching my brother seduce the girl of my dreams. My mind slowed as if it was working through sludge. I couldn't come up with a witty or even logical line to save my life. Tristan tore his eyes away from Lexi for a moment to glance in my direction. It only took a fraction of a second for recognition to register in his eyes. He knew I was enamored with Lexi. To him, that meant the competition was on. He wasn't able to let me have anything I wanted. Some innate drive deep inside him wouldn't allow him to lose to me. I didn't view us as competitors, but he did. He always had and likely always would. If he knew that I wanted something, he would do anything in his power to get it. It didn't make sense because he had everything, but he couldn't stand for me to win, ever. I couldn't really even blame him for it. It was simply his nature. The light of accepting a challenge flashed in Tristan's eyes, and I knew my chance of earning Lexi's heart had been eliminated before we really even had a chance to begin. I had shown my weakness to Tristan, and he would take full advantage of it. I've wondered 1,000 times since that fateful day if I had just been able to hide my attraction to Lexi, would Tristan have quickly moved on to the next shiny thing? Was he truly drawn to her, or was he seduced by the idea of besting me yet again? Time seemed frozen as we stood there. So much was happening in the heavy silence between us. I'm not sure if the sisters were aware when the dynamic changed, but I knew the precise moment when Tristan set his sights on winning Lexi. It felt like my heart was being ripped right out of my chest. He had the audacity to grin in my direction. He looked to me like a predatory wolf, but when he turned that smile on Lexi, her cheeks turned an even lovelier shade of pink and she fluttered her long lashes at him. My stomach soured and I almost gagged. Why couldn't she see that he only wanted her to keep me from having a chance with her? The scene playing out before me was my absolute worst nightmare, yet there was nothing I could do to stop it. "Would you like to go for a walk with me to look for beach glass?" Tristan aimed the question at Lexi, who looked utterly enchanted by his attention.
"I'd love to,"
she said dreamily. Her facial expression and voice both fell when she remembered her sister.
"but I'm supposed to watch her."
She pointed over her shoulder in Sarah's direction. "She can come with us," Tristan offered gallantly. I nearly rolled my eyes when he added, "Ty can keep her company." And just like that, our roles were established. Sarah and I trailed along behind our superior siblings. Although I sensed that she didn't mind being stuck with me, I did not care to get to know her. Lexi was the one I wanted, not her plain Jane kid sister. Besides, I thought Sarah must be a couple of years my junior. I wasn't a cradle robber. When Tristan smoothly slid his hand out to encompass Lexi's dainty one, I audibly sucked in a breath. It was torture to watch, but I couldn't seem to break my gaze away.
"You might as well give up on that,"
Sarah informed me logically, tilting her head in their direction when she noticed my distress.
"She has googly eyes for your brother and Lexi always gets what she wants."
I didn't bother to tell her that I was overly familiar with having a sibling that always won. It was too painful to admit aloud that my chances for a relationship with Lexi were over before they really began. We walked in silence for a long time. Although I couldn't hear what they were saying, Lexi's delighted laughter wafted back to us, carried by the lakeside breeze. Whatever Tristan was saying was obviously captivating her. I loved the sound of her giggles, but it grated on my nerves that they were in response to my brother's charm. He was effortlessly seducing her, while I stood silently by, helplessly watching it all unfold before my horrified eyes. I found a brilliant blue, perfectly smooth piece of beach glass and stooped to pick it up. My first thought was that it was the exact shade of Lexi's eyes. Sarah marveled at it.
"Oh, that's pretty."
Even though I could tell that she wanted the stone, I just nodded. Excited to give Lexi my new treasure, I picked up the pace of my walking to catch up with them. Sarah stayed in stride with me, obviously having caught on to my intentions. Tristan's flash of irritation when we appeared beside them wasn't lost on me. I held the jewel-colored glass out in front of Lexi. "Here, I just found this." Before I could finish my sentence, Tristan snatched the glass out of my hand. "This is almost the exact color of your eyes," he said to Lexi, holding it up near her face to verify. After examining the two together, he finally decided, "It's a close second, but nothing could be as beautiful as your amazing eyes." She fluttered her long lashes at him, obviously completely smitten. I was too stunned to speak. Not only had my twin swooped in and charmed the girl of my dreams, but now he was also stealing my discoveries and ideas. She was supposed to be gracing me with that enamored look, not him. To this day, I can remember how the fury rushed through my veins in that moment. If I'd had a weapon, I most certainly would have used it on Tristan. He always ruined everything for me, but this was too much to take. When he gave me his classic I win grin, I nearly came unglued. It seemed almost like he relished taking what I wanted. I wondered for a brief moment if I might have been wrong all these years. Perhaps Tristan was the evil twin after all, not me. That reprieve was short-lived because I quickly remembered my vivid fantasies of murdering my own brother, or at least maiming him beyond recognition. Despite how much I wished it could be different, I was and likely always would be the Cain to his Abel. When your twin brother is always the hero, the only role left to play is the villain. Like it or not, I feared that was my lot in life. I stared at Lexi's seashell pink perfect nails as my brother brought her hand up to his lips for a sweet kiss. There was no denying that he was smooth, especially not when she started giggling like a silly schoolgirl. Having had enough, I stalked away. I knew they wouldn't bother to follow me, and that was just fine. I'd had enough of their sickening, budding relationship. My best chance with Lexi would be if Tristan quickly tired of her and moved on to his next conquest. Unfortunately for me, that was not how things worked out. It was the longest summer of my life. Tristan and Lexi were inseparable. Their constant togetherness caused both sets of parents to meet and become friends. That left me to entertain Sarah. When I complained to my mom about having to spend all of my time with Lexi's pesky little sister, Mom told me that I was being selfish. The anger welled inside me, almost to the breaking point, but I managed to hold it in and fume silently. I wasn't the one being selfish, but no one else seemed to see that. With each passing day, Tristan weaseled his way further into Lexi's heart. She already looked at him like he could walk on water, so the prospect of her crush on him growing seemed impossible, yet somehow he managed to make her dazzling blue eyes light up more every time she saw him. It was nauseating. I was counting down the days until the end of summer. We lived on the lakeshore year-round, but Lexi's family was only here for the season. As much as I couldn't stand the thought of her leaving, I didn't want to witness her ever-growing feelings for Tristan any longer. When I asked Sarah if they would be coming back next summer, the tug of guilt in my stomach over the hopeful look that sprang into her eyes was undeniable. She answered,
Yes, I think so. I'll probably grow a lot by then. I might even be as tall as you.
Knowing that I needed to shut down any hopes she was harboring before she got her heart broken, I said, "You'll never catch up to your sister." The devastated look on her face before she masked it made me feel like a total jerk, but I didn't want her to feel the way I currently did, so I refused to amend my statement. I knew what it was like to care for someone who only had eyes for my sibling. My intention had been to let her down easily before her feelings for me grew. Instead, I think I ended up making it worse. Sarah covered her mouth and ran off in tears. I cursed and slammed my hand into the outer wall of my dad's pole barn where he built his boats. It wasn't my brightest move, but I blame it on my being an angry, frustrated, and jealous teenager who wasn't thinking with the head on his shoulders. In search of an ice pack for my already throbbing knuckles, I opened the office door to my dad's massive, pristine facility. If I live to be 100, I'll never forget the horrendous sight inside the building. Tristan had my sweet, innocent Lexi backed up against Dad's latest creation, a one-of-a-kind, handcrafted wooden boat that had been sanded and glazed until it gleamed. I heard Lexi redacted as she laced her fingers through Tristan's hair at the back of his neck. He was kissing her hungrily, like an uncouth monster. Unfortunately, from the size and encouraging sounds she was making, there was no doubt that Lexi liked what the ape was doing to her. Lexi's shirt was partially unbuttoned and one of my brother's hands was inside, redacted. I had imagined my own hand on that redacted so many times. The visual of my brother's hand, so like my own, doing exactly what I ached to do was almost unbearable. When I saw his other palm begin snaking its way up her leg redacted, I couldn't take it anymore. I ran outside and retched in the grass. The sight of him intimately touching the girl of my dreams was etched on my brain. As much as I would have liked to unsee or forget it, I couldn't. That horrid vision even haunted me during my sleep. I woke up drenched in sweat, shaking and distraught night after night. Even though I had figured they probably shared some level of physical intimacy, actually seeing it with my own eyes was traumatizing to my hormonal teen brain. I'm not proud of it, but the idea of finding a way to get rid of Tristan so that I could be there to comfort Lexi through her heartbreak crossed my mind more than once. It wasn't the first time, nor would it probably be the last, that I fantasized about not being a twin. My life would be so much better if Tristan wasn't always right there, besting me at everything. Perhaps if he hadn't been born, I would be the golden child. I could be the winner who got everything he wanted, rather than the second-class citizen who paled in comparison to his brother. As much as I didn't want to, we ended up spending much of the remainder of the summer in each other's company. Lexi was in charge of keeping an eye on her little sister. When Lexi batted her long lashes at me and asked me to come along on their adventures to keep Sarah company, I was powerless to resist her. I would have preferred to sulk in my room, but I couldn't have denied her anything when she gazed at me with those gorgeous cornflower blue eyes. I grudgingly dragged along behind my brother and my crush to the movies, the harbor, the ice cream shop, the beach, the pier, the Ferris wheel, and anywhere else their hearts desired. It was obvious on our adventures that Sarah was continuing to develop a significant crush on me, despite my best efforts to quell it by being a grumpy pain in the butt. The more of a rude jerk I tried to be, the more Sarah seemed to like me. If only that tactic worked for Lexi, but Tristan was already filling the role of arrogant bad boy in her life. Even though I couldn't stand the thought of Lexi leaving, I was anxious for summer to come to an end. I knew that Tristan wouldn't be able to keep it in his pants during an entire school year, so I was counting down the days until Lexi and her family returned to their home, which was also in Michigan, but nowhere near the coast. I hoped that the following summer, when Lexi's family returned to Harbor Shores, she would have wisened up to Tristan's womanizing ways and be ready to focus her time and attention on me, the brother who truly cared for her. The clock ticking down the time to their departure was obviously starting to concern Lexi. We were at our usual table at the ice cream shop when she said,
I'm going to miss these delicious treats so much when we go home.
She emphasized her words by taking a large bite of her strawberry ice cream cone with the chocolate shell coating that she loved. You gonna miss anything else, baby? Tristan leaned in and kissed her on the lips, not caring about the other patrons in the shop, including me, being forced to witness it. Their public displays of affection made my stomach churn, but I couldn't help wondering what her ice cream-cooled lips would feel like against mine. She already smelled like strawberries, so the addition of chocolate would only make her delightful scent that much sweeter. I leaned back in my chair so I could look around at anything but them. I needed to put additional physical distance between us. The crazy fantasy of leaning across the table to find out exactly what those cool, sweet lips would taste and feel like was overpowering, but I knew that acting on it wouldn't work out in my favor.
I guess I might miss someone else.
Lexi teased my brother, batting her lashes prettily. Is that so? He was leaned in, gazing at her. His lips were practically back to touching hers. He was exactly where I longed to be. Lexi surprised us all by saying,
Of course. I'm going to miss Ty.
It was obvious she was teasing and flirting with my brother, but I savored her words nonetheless. Evidently having enough of my mooning over her sister, Sarah rolled her eyes.
Oh, he's going to miss you too.
I wasn't surprised that she had noticed my continued crush on Lexi, but I wondered if the other two knew about it as well. If they were aware of my feelings, they really didn't care because they constantly flirted and kissed and carried on as if no one else was in their vicinity. Ty, huh? Tristan asked her, tickling her side and making her giggle.
Oh yes.
She teased him further.
I don't know how I'll survive for 9 long months without him.
It was exactly what I wanted to hear, but I knew her kind words about me were only said to flirt with Tristan. The bait worked. He lunged at her and they kissed like there wasn't another soul in their deliriously happy orbit. I finally had to clear my throat when old Mrs. Guthrie pinched up her face in distaste from a nearby table. Proving that he had a tiny bit of decency left, Tristan pulled back. I'm not sure I would have had that much strength in the same situation. With a naughty gleam in her eye, Lexi went on with their conversation as if the lengthy and passionate makeout session hadn't interrupted it.
In fact, I was hoping to have a private conversation with Ty, if you don't mind.
She finally broke her adoring gaze away from my brother to smile over at me. My heart was racing. I couldn't imagine what she wanted to speak to me about. Deep down I knew that it wouldn't be anything to do with her secretly liking me, but my dry throat and sweaty palms didn't seem to be as logical as my brain. After popping the tip of her ice cream cone into her luscious mouth, Lexi smiled at me.
Would you like to go for a walk with me?
Yes. I was so worked up that for a moment my childhood stuttering issue returned. Swallowing and taking a deep breath, I forced my metabolic reaction to calm down a bit. Once I had a bit more control of myself, I responded, I'd love to. I stood and took my half-eaten chocolate and peanut butter ice cream cone to the trash receptacle. There was no way I could force anything down my throat when Lexi was giving me that expectant look. Returning to the table, I held out my hand to help her up. When her soft, dainty hand accepted my offered one, all of my efforts to calm down flew out the window. The jolt of electricity from her touch was undeniable. I gazed at her, wondering if she could feel it too.
We'll see you in a bit.
She smiled down at our stunned siblings. I'll never forget the look on Tristan's face, with his mouth agape and his eyes registering shock as Lexi and I walked hand in hand out of that ice cream shop. It was easily the best moment of my life. My on-top-of-the-world feeling didn't last too long. As soon as we were out of sight of the ice cream shop's picture window, Lexi let go of my hand. I immediately missed the tingling warmth of her touch.
Thanks for coming with me.
She smiled up at me. I tried to keep my voice normal, but it still sounded too high when I responded, of course. We had spent loads of time together, but never really alone. The monumental importance of this moment hammered in my chest. She found an empty, shady bench that looked out over the glassy water for us to sit on. I tried to sit close by her side, but she smoothly put some distance between us. The two of us stared out at the water for a bit, seemingly lost in thought. My mind was racing with the possibilities of what she might want to talk to me about. When she finally spoke, I wished the silence had continued to linger.
I really like Tristan.
She started. It wasn't earth-shattering news, but still wasn't what I cared to hear from her glossy pink lips. Unsure of my voice, I merely nodded. This couldn't be what she brought me aside to discuss, so I wanted her to go on without interruption.
In fact,
She went on, seeming lost in her own thoughts.
I think I might be falling in love with him.
Her dreamy admission had bile rising in my throat, threatening to erupt. I winced and tried to swallow it down. The last thing I needed was to embarrass myself that way in front of her. Seeming completely unaware of my discomfort, Lexi continued.
He's so handsome and sweet and charming and funny and, well, hot.
Her cheeks flushed hot pink over that last word, making her look even more impossibly pretty. I couldn't imagine why she was torturing me this way. I certainly didn't need to hear a list of all the ways she believed my twin was superior to me. It was heartbreaking, but I did my best not to let my crushed feelings show on my face. The strain of keeping it hidden probably made me look constipated, but I did my best not to be weak and crumple on the outside, despite my devastating emotional injuries.
I'm no dummy.
She went on as if she weren't ripping my heart to shreds.
I know that other girls will throw themselves at him.
I managed to bob my head once and a half nod. That much was absolutely true. Girls were constantly hitting on Tristan. He did too much flirting to be considered an innocent victim, but there was no denying that he attracted beautiful girls with little to no effort on his part, other than simply being the almighty Tristan Davis.
Once summer ends, it will be a long time before I can be with him again, so I want to do something that will make him remember me. Hopefully it will give him the strength to turn down those other girls.
Her cute little nose that was dotted with light freckles scrunched up when she said the words other girls. She looked so irresistibly adorable that the meaning of her words weren't quite registering with me. She turned to face me on the bench and gazed up at me with the most gorgeous blue eyes on the planet. Having her full attention focused on me nearly bowled me over until she said,
I'm going to have redacted with Tristan. I want us to be each other's first and last redacted.
I leaned forward in an attempt to hide the devastated look on my face. It felt like I had been punched in the gut repeatedly and left for dead. This couldn't be happening. It was bad enough thinking about my brother's hands touching Lexi's smooth tan skin, but the thought of him redacted made me shiver with revulsion. My head shook back and forth in an effort to stave off the naughty, disgusting images in my mind, but they wouldn't go away. It was like seeing myself in redacted positions with the girl I loved, only it wasn't me, it was Tristan. It was always Tristan. Lexi didn't seem to take notice of my inner turmoil as she went on dreamily.
No matter what happens, we will always be special to each other if we are each other's firsts.
I wanted to scream that she needed to wake up. The ship had sailed long ago for becoming Tristan's first. He was a cad who used girls as conquest to be overtaken before quickly moving on to the next pretty female that caught his eye. I was desperate for her to see the truth, but the words wouldn't come. I sat there silently, like the idiot that I evidently was.
Anyway,
Lexi went on, oblivious to my torture.
I wanted to ask you as a friend.
I visibly winced at those words, unable to contain it.
Will you keep an eye on him this year? Remind him about me if he starts to stray.
She was gazing up at me with such hope filling her eyes that I couldn't have denied her anything. I nodded and tried to smile, but it probably looked more like a grimace.
Oh, thank you.
She gushed before pulling me into a delightful hug. I savored her warm embrace. Drawing in a deep breath, I enjoyed the unique strawberry and coconut smell of her hair. Her redacted were pressing into my chest. She felt so good against me that I could feel my redacted. I willed it to go down, but there was no restraining it when Lexi was touching me. She hopped up from the bench, obviously completely unaware of my predicament.
You're the best, Ty.
With that, she flounced off, probably to find my brother and tell him that he was about to become the luckiest man in the world. Out of necessity, I sat there for a while. I couldn't head back down the boardwalk with a redacted straining out towards everyone I passed. I tipped my head back to look at the bright blue sky. Redacted. I yelled it out loud, and it felt good to say the word, even if it made people bug their eyes out at me and walk out of their way so they didn't have to pass close to my bench. Shaking my head in disgust, I realized that only I would get redacted from a friendly hug by a girl who had just told me she was planning to give her innocence to my jerk of a brother. Just when I thought this entire scenario couldn't get any worse, Sarah skipped in my direction. I turned away from Sarah and placed my hands over my redacted, but there was no hiding the redacted. One area where I didn't need to be envious of anyone else was my redacted. Naturally, that meant that Tristan was equally well endowed, of course. The golden child couldn't possibly be inferior in any way. As I had known they would, Sarah's eyes bugged out when she caught sight of my redacted. She tried to look away, but her gaze kept returning to it like they were magnetized to my redacted. I shook my head, feeling guilty and wondering if this was the poor girl's first sight of a redacted. I glanced down to confirm, even though I already knew exactly what I would see. Sure enough, the outline redacted was clearly visible. Unwilling to take the not at all subtle hint, Sarah plopped down right beside me.
Did she? I mean, are you guys?
She didn't seem to know what she wanted to ask. No, I answered simply before adding, I'd like to be alone right now.
Oh, okay.
She nodded her understanding, even though I doubted she had any clue what any of this meant. Proving that I had perplexed her, she frowned and turned her head to the side.
But you can't. How are you going to?
She was once again at a loss for words. This was the most awkward non-conversation I'd ever had with anyone, let alone a girl 3 years my junior. Even though neither one of us had mentioned the elephant on the park bench, we both obviously knew it was there. I'm just going to sit here for a while by myself and think about my grandmother or something. She smiled at my lame joke.
I could walk directly in front of you until we get to your house.
She offered kindly, surprising me with her maturity and empathy. Nah, it's okay, I smiled to let her know I appreciated the offer. It won't take long once I start thinking about Nana Janice.
Poor Nana Janice.
Sarah grinned and got up. Deciding that I might as well make light of it since Sarah was being such a good sport, I said, Nana Janice has decades of practice at effectively redacted far and wide. Sarah tipped her head back and guffawed with laughter as she stood and walked away. I sat there for a long while wondering why I couldn't be that quick-witted and funny when Lexi was around. Maybe one of these days I would master the Tristan level of smooth talking with a real girl, not just someone's kid sister. If I thought my Tristan and Lexi nightmares were bad before, they were nothing compared to the traumatizing thoughts and visualizations that haunted me now. They were no longer limited to the nighttime either. I could be in the middle of eating my oatmeal with blueberries and bacon for breakfast, when a flash of the two of them having redacted would pop into my brain. It would immediately ruin my appetite for the rest of the day. My mom was getting worried about my lack of eating, since I normally ate like a small horse. There wasn't anything I could say to appease her. It's not like I could tell her about the very real fear that was invading my mind and keeping me from properly eating or sleeping. She didn't want to hear about either of her sons' redacted lives, or lack thereof. The visions wouldn't have been so bad if I could have convinced myself that it was actually me kissing and redacted Lexi, until she redacted from my touch. After all, the male looked exactly like me. I knew it was Tristan though. It was always him. I could practically hear her redacted his name. The mere thought made me dizzy and queasy. Every time they weren't directly in my sight, I wondered if they had snuck off somewhere to redacted. I tortured myself with these panic thoughts, but I couldn't stop them. The worst part was, I knew once they had redacted once, they would find every opportunity to quietly disappear and redact it again. It wasn't a once-and-done activity. As redacted as they already were for each other, I couldn't imagine how redacted they would be once they had fully tasted the redacted they had to offer each other. My stomach churned at the thought, even though I hadn't really eaten anything to throw up. I knew I had to put an end to this vicious cycle of traumatizing thoughts, but they refused to go away. I was tempted to warn Lexi away from my brother. After all, he was well known at our school as a womanizing redacted. Of course, that didn't stop any of the girls there from redacted for him when he turned his attention in their direction. They all seemed to think they would be the one to win his heart and change him. Lexi probably wouldn't listen to me anyway. She was too enraptured by Tristan's charm to pay attention to reason. She would likely think I was just trying to cause problems between them because I was jealous. I couldn't deny my jealousy, but that didn't make Tristan's pig-like tendencies any less real. The fear that she would be angry with me for attempting to ruin her relationship with Tristan was the only thing that kept me from spilling the truth to Lexi. I really didn't care if Tristan hated me, but I wouldn't be able to stand it if Lexi did. Even though I knew she viewed me merely as her boyfriend's twin and her sister's entertainment committee, she seemed to like and trust me. I wasn't willing to give up either of those sentiments from her, even though it was only a fraction of the feelings I craved from her. All of my wondering about when it would happen was wasted. I could tell the exact night when their plan was set into motion. We had discussed grabbing burgers and going to the movies as a foursome, but when Lexi arrived at our house that night, she was alone. Supposedly, Sarah wasn't feeling well. I wondered briefly what they had bribed her with to get her to stay home.
Looks like you have a free night to do what you want, instead of watching after my baby sister.
Lexi smiled in my direction as if she were granting me a huge favor. When she turned her beaming gaze on my brother, I couldn't help but see the knowing, excited gaze that passed between them. This was obviously an arranged situation, so they could have some alone time. I knew without a shadow of a doubt that Tristan was planning to redacted my sweet, innocent Lexi tonight. The predatory gleam in Tristan's eyes was disgusting. It was like watching a wolf stalk his snowy white lamb. Unable to stand idly by while he took advantage of her, I piped up. I was looking forward to seeing that movie. I'll come along with you guys anyway. I tried to make it sound like an offer they couldn't refuse. Tristan gave me a death stare. Really? You want to see the latest romantic comedy chick flick that all the girls are raving about? You redacted. The last two words were mumbled under his breath, but we all heard them. My dad scrunched his dark brows together in distaste. Tristan language. Turning to me, he asked, "Why would you want to go with them, son? They don't usually get to go on a date alone." I wanted to scream at him. That was exactly why I wanted to tag along, but he went on, oblivious to my pain. You don't want to be the third wheel on their bicycle built for two. He smiled at his lame joke and my mom grinned in his direction. I rolled my eyes at their corny, love-based connection that never seemed to simmer down. Sometimes it was frustrating to have parents who were still wild about each other after all these years, even though I was glad they were still together in such a united team. Tristan took that opportunity to slip away. Don't wait up, he called over his shoulder as he took Lexi's hand within his own and they jogged giddily out of our house. I knew why they were so happy and it made me fume. Trying to forget what was happening, I went to my room and slammed the door. Unable to concentrate on my video games, music, or even the redacted I pulled up on my laptop, I resorted to pacing the room like a caged animal. My mind raced as I tried to figure out if they had time yet to get to their private location. I didn't know where they had chosen to go, but this evening's events had obviously been planned, so Tristan probably had a romantic spot all queued up and ready to seduce Lexi out of her redacted. Was he already kissing her? I kicked at my bed in frustration before turning and pacing back towards the door to my bedroom. Had he already redacted any of her clothes? She had looked especially adorable tonight in a white denim miniskirt and a ruffly shirt with bright pink flowers. Her freshly polished pink toenails were peeking out from her jeweled sandals. I couldn't help but notice that they were the exact same shade as the flowers on her shirt. She had obviously put a great deal of effort into getting ready for her night in Tristan's arms. I tried to come up with something else to think about, but my mind wouldn't cooperate. It kept circling right back around to the two of them and what they were likely doing at this precise moment. I wondered what redacted she had selected for the occasion. When I closed my eyes, I pictured her in pure white undergarments. Her smooth tanned skin would be even more irresistible contrasted with the bright wisps of fabric. Or maybe she had surprised him, and when he redacted, he discovered to his delight that she redacted. I could only imagine how wonderful she would feel. Realizing I was torturing myself, I sat down on my bed and ran my fingers through my hair, trying unsuccessfully to oust the horrific images from my mind. Was he being gentle with her? I couldn't stand the thought of him redacted. Was he redacted, giving her the classic redacted experience for her first time, or had he encouraged her to redacted? Was he giving her redacted? Was she redacted? As much as I didn't want to think about it, the rapid-fire questions wouldn't stop pestering my brain. I reclined back on my bed, hoping for the blessed oblivion of sleep. The horrific slideshow that invaded my brain with flashing images was too much to handle. I imagined redacted. The mental images were tortuous, but they wouldn't stop coming, no matter how hard I tried to get rid of them. I bolted upright with sweat beading on my upper lip. My breath was coming fast and my stomach threatened to upheave, even though there was nothing substantial in it. Unable to stay in one place any longer, I got up and bolted from my room. I ran out our front door without even pausing to tell my parents I was heading out. My legs took me to the beach and I sprinted for all I was worth. It was a lame attempt to outrun the horrifying images my mind was creating, but it was of no use. I ran until the stitch in my side became unbearable, and then I ran some more, relishing the pain because it was physical rather than the emotional torture I had been enduring these past weeks. When I finally stopped, I leaned down to press my hands above my knees and tried to catch my breath. That's when I heard her.
Oh, Tristan.
Her voice, carried by the lakeside breeze, was unmistakably redacted. Whatever he was doing to her, she really liked. I stood there frozen and horrified. Of course he had brought her to Smuggler's Cove. The dunes had created a perfectly hidden cave where redacted on the beach out of sight from the land, but with a view of the lake stretched out before them. It was the ideal place to take her redacted. If I had been rational enough to really think it through, I would have realized that this was where he would bring her for their first time. The sickening thought crossed my mind that maybe some subconscious part of me had known. Was that why I ran here? Had some twisted portion of my brain wanted to torture me this way? The idea that I might have come here somewhat on purpose was revolting. What the heck was wrong with me? When I heard Tristan begin redacted, it was too much. I had to get away. Ignoring the pain in my side, I ran and ran. My feeble attempt to outrun the replaying sounds of their redacted failed. Now I had actually heard it, rather than just imagining it. The real sounds of them and the redacted were in my head, and I feared I would never get them out. After that fateful night, I tried my best to be disgusted with Lexi. She was no longer the sweet, innocent girl that I had fallen for at the beginning of summer. The problem with my master plan to move on from her was that I simply didn't care about her indiscretion. I wanted to think of her as tainted and tarnished by my brother, but if she had batted her long lashes in my direction, I would have jumped to do her bidding. In fact, she didn't even have to flirt with me. I was still completely smitten with her, despite my best intentions otherwise. Luckily for me, the summer was quickly coming to an end. That was doubly good news because if I had to watch Lexi and Tristan slip away to redacted one more time, I was going to shoot someone, preferably Tristan. The fact that our parents chose to remain oblivious to their obvious ploys for alone time made me even more livid. It was almost like they gave their tacit approval for the two young redacted to sneak off and redacted. When Tristan said they were going for a walk for the 4th time that week, I lost it. As soon as the screen door slammed shut behind them, Tristan and Lexi joined hands and ran giddily down our cobblestone path. Whirling on my oblivious parents, I blustered, "Don't you know what they're going to do?" My parents shared a smile, a freaking smile, before my mother said,
"They're young and in love. Let them be."
I couldn't believe my ears. Our parents knew that Tristan was redacted Lexi, and they didn't care. Grasping my mom's own word to toss back at them, I said, "Don't you think they're a little too young to be allowed to run off and redacted whenever they feel like it?" I didn't care if I sounded like a prudish old lady. I needed them to put a stop to this for my sanity's sake. The temptation to try to physically shake some sense into them was almost overwhelming. My dad was the one who answered. "Son," he spoke slowly, seeming to be carefully formulating his words, "they're old enough to make their own decisions, and we have taught both of you boys to be careful and smart. We trust your judgment, Tristan's. So we can just go out and redact it with whoever we want, as long as we're careful." I was furious that they weren't outraged that Tristan was doing this right under their noses.
"Tristan and Lexi have been together all summer, honey."
Mom mindlessly rubbed one of her rescue cat's ears as she put her 2 cents in. I cringed at her quiet approval and wished she would take it back. Oblivious to how I recoiled at her words, she said,
"This isn't just some one-time fling. They truly care about each other. In fact,"
she turned and grinned at my dad,
"it seems to me like they might be falling in love."
I looked down, shaking my head. My parents weren't getting it, and they obviously weren't going to be any help in stopping Tristan and Lexi's redacted. Angry with them for not siding with me, I snapped, "I guess I'm going to go out on the town and find someone to redact it, since that's okay with you two." Ignoring the seedier implication of my statement, Dad said, "I think it would be great if you found someone to date. It can't be any fun following Tristan and his girlfriend around all the time." Fuming over the word girlfriend, I stomped towards the front door.
"Have fun,"
my mom shouted, as if my world wasn't in a complete shambles around my ankles. As an afterthought, she added,
"and don't worry about your brother. Lexi really seems to care about him. Besides, he's a big boy and can take care of himself."
My spine stiffened. I couldn't believe that the two people who were supposed to always have my back had watched our one-sided love triangle unfold all summer and still thought that my problem with Lexi dating my brother was my fear that Tristan would get hurt. Have they met Tristan? He's invincible. "Way to pinpoint the problem, Mom," I said sarcastically before bolting out the screen door and letting it slam behind me. I couldn't believe that my parents were so clueless about my heartache. Were they so blinded by Tristan's glowing light of happiness that they couldn't see past it to their distraught, heartbroken son? It was tempting to go back inside and shout at them for being so oblivious, but some still rational sliver of my brain knew that nothing good would come from that. Instead, I walked to town, determined to find a willing young lady to help me forget about Lexi, even if the reprieve only lasted for a few minutes of redacted. My redacted was demanding liberation. Redacted while imagining Lexi's skin against mine wasn't quite getting the job done. I needed someone else's touch to help me release all of this pent-up redacted. There had to be someone in this sleepy lakeside town who needed the healing solace of another's touch just as much as I did. I just had to find her. After circling the lakeside's typical teen haunts 3 times, I only found one girl whose eyes couldn't resist locking with mine. Lexi's little sister, Sarah. Sarah's eyes lit up as she scurried after me.
"You're on the prowl for a girl, aren't you?"
She sounded curious and oddly excited by the prospect. I ignored her, but she went on anyway.
"I was wondering when you'd give up on stealing my sister from your jerkwad brother."
She had caught up to me by then, and her words caught my attention. Sarah was nearly a foot shorter than I was, so I had to tilt my head down to speak in her direction. "You think Tristan is a jerkwad?" I didn't bother trying to hide the amusement in my tone. She was the first person I had ever encountered who didn't think the great Tristan Davis could walk on water.
"Of course.
Sarah beamed up at me.
You're so much better than he is, in every way."
Her blue eyes, which were just a shade duller than Lexi's, gazed up at me with adoration from behind her glasses. I couldn't deny that it felt good, really good, to have someone prefer me to my twin. If I squinted a little, I could see some vague resemblance between her and Lexi, but not enough of one. Besides, she was way too young for me. "Listen, jailbait," I said to her, knowing that I needed to firmly shut the door to her crush on me. "This is never going to happen." I made a quick turn down towards the docks, hoping that she would take the hint and not follow me. I shook my head when I heard her quick footsteps clambering after me.
"What does jailbait mean?"
she asked me, proving her innocence. Stopping and whirling to face her, I said, "It means that you're 15 and you have no idea that you're playing with fire."
"I'm almost 16.
She lifted her head defiantly. Giving her my best raised brow stare down, I said, "Exactly." Sarah remained unwilling to admit that she had just proven my point. Instead, she boldly went on with a hint of desperation clinging to her tone.
"I know what boys like."
She accentuated her words by reaching around me and running her palms up my back inside my shirt. I sucked in a deep breath, willing myself to stay strong. There was no denying that her touch on my skin felt phenomenal and was exactly what my hormonally charged body was craving.
"Let me show you,"
she whispered huskily, pressing herself into me. I could feel her small redacted pushing into my abdomen. My redacted noticed them too and was already redacted, ready to leap into action. This is wrong. You're just a kid. I tried to hold my ground, but my voice sounded croaky. I could tell by the glint in her eyes that she knew she was winning me over.
So are you.
She murmured.
You haven't turned 18 yet.
She made a valid point, but this still didn't feel right. My mind was warring with my traitorous body. I knew that I shouldn't let this happen with my crush's little sister, but my zinging pleasure centers were on high alert, making me powerless to stop it. She was so soft, feminine, and willing. My heartbroken, redacted body didn't have the strength to resist too much more. Someone will see us. I threw out a last-ditch effort to stop the inevitable. She shot that down quickly.
It's dark down here in the shadows. Besides, everyone is too busy having fun up on the boardwalk to look at what is happening down here on the docks.
I looked around and confirmed that she was correct. We were pretty well hidden between the giant sailboats and the shadows in an unlit portion of the dock. My brain scrambled to find another reason why we shouldn't do this, but came up empty. I wasn't sure what she had in mind, but whatever it was, my body was ready, willing, and able. She moved her wandering hands down redacted. My eyes refused to stay open as I tipped my head back, savoring her touch. When she firmly redacted, I lost my last shred of control. Pressing into her, I leaned my head down and crashed my lips onto hers. When my tongue sought hers, she met it willingly. We clung to each other, kissing hungrily and aching for more. I deepened the kiss further, and Sarah redacted. She was redacted, and I was desperate for her touch. She moved back slightly to make room between us as one of her hands let go of its tight clutch on my redacted and moved to redacted. When she redacted, I pulled back from our kiss and my breath came out in a hiss. You don't know what you're doing to me. My words sounded strained even to my own ears. We have to stop, or I don't know if I'll be able to, I warned her.
It's okay,
she whispered as she deftly redacted. Having tried my best to be a decent guy, I gave up on resisting her. I redacted. As I heard the redacted, any blood that was left in the head on my shoulders traveled south. I cupped my hands over her redacted at the same time as she redacted. Her redacted were small, but her redacted, almost like they were reaching out for my touch. They felt amazing as my fingers redacted. My redacted was redacted towards Sarah, craving her touch. When I didn't feel her hands wrap around me, I opened my eyes. She was gazing down at my redacted like it was the most frightening, enthralling, and delightful thing her eyes had ever encountered. Are you scared? I asked her, praying that she wasn't. She tore her eyes away from my redacted to lock them with mine.
You're magnificent.
With that simple, wonderful compliment, she tipped her lips up for a kiss, which I happily provided. As her tongue delved into my mouth, she tentatively redacted. She lightly redacted, exploring it slowly as if she was savoring it. My hands fell away from her redacted so I could pull her closer. I feared I might redacted just from her simple feather-light touch of my redacted. Her hand felt glorious. My entire being was focused on her painfully slow, enthralled discovery of redacted. I let her explore me at her own pace, even though I was aching to redacted. The more she redacted, the harder it became for me to focus on anything else. I broke our kiss and tipped my head back, savoring the feeling of her touch. She rested her head on my chest as she looked down to watch my redacted in reaction to her attention.
It's so redacted,
she said dreamily, sounding totally enamored with her new discovery. I chuckled, but it came out more like a gasp as I tried to keep myself from boarding one of these empty boats to take her below deck to finish this. Some innate sense seemed to kick in with Sarah, as if she suddenly understood what needed to happen.
Do you want me to redacted?
She asked, her voice filled with uncertainty. It took every bit of strength I could muster, but I managed to say, you don't have to. The look of relief on her face was undeniable, but she still said,
I don't want to leave you like this.
I practically sagged into her arms when she said that. I had never been so desperate for redacted in my entire life. I knew that even if I redacted 1,000 times, this ache wouldn't go away. If you could just redacted, I suggested, trying to be delicate.
Redacted.
Sarah seemed perplexed, but she quickly brightened with an idea. When she redacted, I immediately missed the heat of her touch. I watched enthralled as she redacted before returning and picking up the pace of her redacted.
Like this?
She asked, seeking my approval. I let out a redacted. Just like that, baby. Anxious to please me, Sarah redacted. She was like a redacted. It wasn't long before I could feel the redacted building. My body began the familiar tingling, and I tipped my head back. Not caring while in the moment if we were overheard, I let out redacted in time with the redacted. After a final redacted, I opened my eyes. Lexi, I yelled as I saw the girl of my dreams taking in the scene before her in wide-eyed horror. Sarah immediately dropped my redacted and stepped back.
Lexi.
The pain in her voice that I would say her sister's name at a time like this was undeniable. Tristan shook his head at me with a look of pure disgust as he put an arm around Lexi and turned her in the other direction. Sarah looked up at me with a heartbroken expression. Her sister had been behind her, so she didn't know why I had said Lexi's name at such an inopportune moment.
How could you?
She glared up at me. It's not what you think, I started, but she put a hand over her mouth, while the other went up palm first to stop me from continuing. The tears were already beginning to fall when she ran past me. Of course, she went in the opposite direction from Lexi and Tristan, proving that nothing, not even something small, could possibly work out in my favor. Somehow, my redacted life had just managed to get a million times worse. Tristan. I'm a bit of a redacted. Okay, I'll admit it. I'm a total redacted. I don't mean to be. It's just that everything seems to always work out in my favor. It's almost like the universe is challenging me to see how big of a redacted I can be, and still get whatever I want. It's no secret that my identical twin Tyler hates me. He makes a feeble attempt to hide it in front of our parents, but I know that he's jealous of me. I don't blame him. I would despise him if our lives were reversed. I definitely won the coin toss in our twin gene pool lottery. We may look the same, but deep down inside I know that I am a winner. Ty isn't. He doesn't have that inner fire that burns bright and makes people succeed. It's not necessarily his fault, but it certainly isn't mine. When we were kids, I would occasionally make an effort to let him win. When I would go at 3/4 power, he would shut down to half. It's almost like there is something in his nature that won't let him beat me at anything. After a while, it became obvious that he is simply the inferior twin. I am faster, smarter, stronger, funnier, and more charming. He blames me for it, but I think if anyone is at fault, it's him. It's almost like he doesn't care that he's a loser. I don't even have to put forth a solid effort to beat him. It just happens naturally. It sucks the fun out of beating someone when he doesn't pose a real challenge. I'll never forget the day I met Lexi. She was playing on the beach with her pesky little sister, and by some miracle, Ty had worked up the nerve to talk to her. I could tell even from a distance that Lexi was gorgeous. She had long golden legs that went all the way up, if you know what I'm saying. It didn't take long to assess the situation as I walked up to the three of them. Ty was obviously smitten by Lexi, but she wasn't interested in him. Why would she be? No one ever was. She couldn't rip those gorgeous lake blue eyes away from me as I walked up to join them. Ty stuttered and stammered as he tried to pull Lexi's attention back in his direction, but with a few charming words I had her clamoring for me. In fairness, Ty did see her and speak to her first, even though it was only by a few minutes. If he had been an alpha male, he would have peed in a proverbial circle around her that I wouldn't have crossed. As it was, he let me saunter in and steal her right out from under his nose. Lexi made her choice. She wanted me. Who was I to argue with her? If she had chosen my twin, I would have backed off, but we all knew she would never pick him over me. I was aware that it enraged Ty to see the two of us together, but I knew what he couldn't seem to grasp. Even if Lexi wasn't with me, she still wouldn't be with him. The way Ty looked at me, like he could see right through me, was beyond creepy. It crossed my mind sometimes that Ty might hate me enough to slip into my room one night and slit my throat. I didn't worry about it too much though. He was such a screw-up he would probably trip and end up stabbing himself. As summer went on, I put Ty's crush on Lexi and his hatred for me out of my mind. I was too consumed by Lexi to worry about him. She was the hottest girl I had ever met, and to my delight, she couldn't seem to keep her hands off me. She had the softest, pinkest lips. When she kissed me, my mind melted. She tasted like sugar cookies and some delicious tropical fruit, pineapple or mango. I couldn't be sure. The only thing I was positive of was that I couldn't get enough of her. I'd had plenty of girls who were willing to redacted, but none like Lexi. She was so perfect it almost hurt. When I touched her redacted for the first time, instead of staring at my hands on them, I gazed into her eyes in awe of her beauty. Exploring Lexi's redacted was different than all of the other girls I had been with. She was so lithe, yet she had curves in all the right places. Her smooth tan skin gave way to milky white triangles that I desired beyond reason. I redacted her until she redacted in my arms. As much as I loved discovering redacted, it was nothing compared to the delights of her tentative redacted. She was so tender and awestruck. It made me certain that mine was the first redacted she had ever touched. That knowledge made her feather-light redacted feel even more special. The more time we spent together, the bolder Lexi became. With a few gentle suggestions from me, she proved to have an incredible knack for redacted. My redacted at just that thought of her redacted. She would redacted just over me, letting the anticipation build as she gazed up into my eyes. I would lie there, helpless and riveted by her every move. The smile she would give me just before redacted let me know that she enjoyed having this much power over me. When she redacted, my entire body would tense. She could have asked me for anything in those glorious moments, and I would have happily given it. Despite having such an innocent and sweet face, she could redacted like no other. I became lost in delirious waves of pleasure as redacted. The only thing better than her redacted was when she would let me redacted. She was shy at first, but that quickly faded away once I put redacted. I had never tasted anything so delectable. I could send her into a wild frenzy with the redacted until she was frantic for my touch. She would redacted, and I gladly gave it to her. When she redacted, I would lose control. I redacted until she redacted. We couldn't get enough of each other. Our redacted provided so much redacted to each other that we almost didn't need to redacted. Almost. I knew she was a redacted, even though she acted like anything but when my redacted. Although I had taken much of her innocence, I didn't feel worthy of taking that last piece of it. It was obvious by some of the comments she made that she assumed I was redacted too. I wasn't going to set her straight. Nothing good would come from that conversation. When she batted her long lashes in my direction and shyly suggested that our redacted should be together, my heroic resolve dissipated. I quickly gave in and agreed to her plan. In my defense, I was a redacted 17-year-old. What other outcome could there have been? I did everything in my power to make her redacted special. Once the date we had picked arrived, I spent much of the afternoon getting Smuggler's Cove ready. I laid out a large blanket in the secluded covered dune, so we wouldn't get sand in any unfortunate places. I set candles all around the area and placed a lighter beside one of them. These items served a dual purpose. They would let Lexi know I had put some thought into this, plus it would advise anyone else with similar plans that the cove was occupied this evening. After pulling 3 redacted from my pocket, I set them in the sand. As redacted as we were for each other, I wouldn't have been a bit surprised if we needed them all. I didn't want to frighten Lexi though, so I kneeled back down to hide 2 of them under the blanket. They would be there in case of emergency, but not staring at us and putting pressure on the entire situation. The moonlight off the water and the crashing of the waves coming into shore from the choppy lake made the perfect backdrop for our special night. I could tell that Lexi was nervous as we ran hand in hand towards the cove. Someone had taken the redacted I had left out, so I reached under the blanket to pull out one of the spares. Lexi gave me a coy smile when she saw what was in my hand. We both knew what was about to happen, but we hadn't directly spoken about it since selecting the date. While I lit the candles, Lexi commented on what a perfect location and evening it was. I nodded my agreement and lit the last candle. When I looked up, Lexi was standing with her back to the opening of the cave, gazing down at me with a look of pure love in her eyes. "I've never seen anyone so beautiful," I told her honestly. The moonlight shining on her hair gave it the appearance of spun gold. Her skin gleamed in the glowing light. She looked like an angel. "You're breathtaking." She smiled at my words. Any residual fear left her face as she confidently redacted. I swallowed audibly as my eyes redacted. Her pale pink redacted stood out against her tan skin. She was absolute perfection. My redacted as I looked at her. I couldn't quite believe that she was giving herself to me. I knew I wasn't worthy of such a gift, but I vowed to do my best to make sure she didn't regret her choice. When she sat down beside me, she helped me redacted. Before long we were both redacted side by side in a warm embrace. I gave her a long sweet kiss, even though my redacted was aching to redacted. After redacted I tipped my head back and looked into her eyes to ask, "Are you sure?" I would have somehow found a way to stop if she wasn't, but thankfully I didn't have to. She leaned up, gave me a kiss on the tip of my nose and said confidently,
Positive.
"Her redacted." It may as well have been my first time because I had never felt anything like it. Redacted with Alexis Bell was like coming home. We redacted those last few precious days of summer. I shouldn't put it so crassly. What we did was so much more than redacted. It was a caring and loving redacted of 2 willing and nubile late-teen bodies. What we did would definitely be classified as redacted, voraciously and frequently, but that doesn't sound like a very manly way to refer to it. That's probably what Ty would call it if he had been lucky enough to redacted Lexi. Lexi was a creative and enthusiastic redacted. She went from being a sweet innocent at the beginning of summer to being familiar with all of the varied ways to redacted as August came to a close. I was the luckiest man in the world to have been the one to take that journey with her. I had started out as the coach to an eager student, but now she was the one redacted. I happily complied with all of her suggestions. I was going to miss redacted when she returned home for the school year. I wasn't dumb enough to say that though. Instead I asked, "How am I going to survive 9 long months without you?" We were redacted snuggled together on a quilt on the floor of the 2nd story of my dad's boat building barn. He had gone to get lumber. Since he was super picky about his wood stock, the chances of us being caught in here were minimal.
"I'm going to miss you so much,"
she said as she began kissing the redacted that she would miss the most and telling them goodbye. When she suggested,
"Maybe we can meet in the middle for dates sometimes,"
I could tell by her hopeful look that this wasn't a new idea. "Maybe once in a while," I responded noncommittally, knowing that once football season was in full swing I would be too busy with sports and schoolwork to make the trip. Football would give way to basketball, which then led into baseball. This was my senior year and I intended to make the most of it. I wouldn't have any real free time until next summer, but I didn't have the heart to tell her that. When she asked,
"Are you going to be able to go for weeks at a time when we can't see each other without redacted?"
I almost choked, but I covered it as a cough. I had assumed she knew that this was a summer romance. I adored her and would be thrilled to pick up where we left off next summer, but I wasn't going to be a redacted hermit during my senior year of high school. I wasn't Ty. I think you have me confused with my brother, I blurted out without thinking. Lexi smacked at my chest and started quickly throwing her clothes on. I hated the hurt look I had made arise on her face, so I hastily amended my snarky statement. I'll keep myself busy counting the hours until I can see you again. I kissed the back of her hand and grinned up into her eyes to erase any lingering anger over my rude comment. We couldn't have known that when we walked into town a little later, we would get an eyeful of my brother proving he wasn't redacted, as he got a public redacted from Lexi's little sister. I heard Tyler using our shared bathroom that connected our bedrooms. Once he finished, I crossed through and flung the door open to his side of the room. Leaning against the door jamb and crossing my arms, I gave him a disgusted smirk. I hadn't bothered to visit his room since we were kids, so he had to know this was a big deal. Glaring back at me, he asked, "Am I going to have to start locking you out of here?" Unfazed by his outburst, I looked down at the floor and shook my head as if I couldn't quite believe how appalling he was. Dude, what the heck is wrong with you? Glancing back up, I realized his face was red with fury that I was calling him out on his cradle robbing. Not caring about his rage, I went on. She's only 15. I narrowed my gaze at him and didn't bother to hide my shocked disbelief. Ty squirmed under my scrutiny. Like you haven't redacted with plenty of 15-year-olds. He tried to defend his deplorable actions. Yeah, when I was 15. I bugged my eyes out at him, stunned that he could be so dense. Get out of my room. He threw a shoe in my direction to enunciate his sentiment, but I was too fast for him. His black Converse slammed against the door after my hasty retreat, and I overheard him cussing about the near miss. I couldn't help but smile at his frustration. He deserved it for making such a redacted move on Sarah. She was just a kid. He had no business taking advantage of her that way. In an effort to make sure Lexi didn't blame me for my brother's despicable actions, I texted her. Sorry about Ty being such a redacted. I don't know what he was thinking. When the 3 dots popped up to indicate Lexi was texting back, my nerves kicked in about what her reaction would be. We shouldn't be forced to see our siblings in the situation we had just encountered, but it had to be 1,000 times worse for her than it was for me.
It's not all his fault. Sarah told me she started it.
I stared at Lexi's text dumbfounded. How could she so easily forgive Ty for taking advantage of her little sister? Rather than accuse her of being a bad sister, I jumped to Sarah's defense. She is just a young girl. Ty should know better. My heart hammered in my chest as I waited for her response. I was beyond agitated that she seemed to be taking Ty's side.
It sounds like she seduced him.
I almost couldn't believe my eyes as I stared at Lexi's texted words. He could have said no. And should have. My pointer fingers were flying over the letters as I 2-finger typed my response.
Like you'll say no to all the girls that hit on you this year at school?
This was getting into dangerous territory. I knew she wanted me to promise to be faithful, but I hated lying to her. There was no way I would be able to abstain from redacted for weeks at a time during my senior year. It just wasn't going to happen. I couldn't admit that to her, though. The thought of Lexi being a free agent and redacted with someone else had me grinding my teeth in tense, barely contained jealousy. I knew my radio silence was stretching on too long, so I sent her a quick response. Yep. The 3 dots failed to pop up, so I knew Lexi was mad about my delayed one-word response. I considered calling her, but I was afraid she would pick up on the lack of sincerity in my tone. As important as this summer romance had been to me, I wasn't ready to be tied down in a long-distance relationship for an entire year. Not wanting her to find anyone else, I texted again. My word choice was intentionally sweet yet vague. I used the opportunity to shift her focus back to our siblings. You are the most important person in the world to me. I'm so glad to hear my brother didn't mess that up.
Of course not. Nothing can mess us up. You're the most important person in the entire world to me, too.
She proceeded to send a bunch of smiley face and heart emojis, so I knew I was off the hook for now. Smiling to myself, I realized she wouldn't be here this year to know what I was up to with other girls. I could court Lexi from afar while dating whoever I wanted to at school. The only person Lexi knew from school was Ty, and he was such a bumbling idiot around her he probably wouldn't be able to tattle on me, even if he dared to try. After texting the kissing emoji and the word night to Lexi, I put my phone down, grabbed some lotion, and rested back on my pillow. I redacted and thought about all the redacted I was destined to score. This year was going to be epic. Dirk. I glared over the seawall as I watched one of my idiot nephews getting redacted on the dock by his brother's girlfriend's sister. The girl with the eager hands looked like barely more than a child. The other 2 siblings approached, and I settled in to watch the fireworks implode. What a couple of redacted, I said aloud to no one in particular as I shook my head with disgust and watched the ridiculous scene unfold. The redacted getting the redacted all over the kid's shirt just in time for her older sister to see. Then he had the gall to call out the wrong sister's name. How my moron nephews had managed to survive into their late teens was beyond me. Neither one of them had a lick of common sense. They were coddled, spoiled idiots, yet they were the ones my father preferred for some unknown reason. Our messed up family was nearly impossible to explain to an outsider. My father was the twins' grandfather, even though I was less than a year older than the moronic duo. Their father, who also happens to be a blessed Davis twin, was my brother. Welcome to the redacted Davis clan, where golden children still exist, and I'm certainly not one of them. Even the brother that no one likes from the younger set of twins, Ty, has a better spot in the family than the illegitimate son of the too old to be a dad again head of the Davis family, Sutton. I am the embarrassing secret that everyone would prefer didn't exist. The Davises have tried over the years to hide me away, but I refuse to be brushed aside. My mama taught me that. She may have been a drunk, but she made sure I had a spot at her sugar daddy's table. Sutton Davis tried to buy her off before I was born, but mama insisted that I be included in his family. When the old man finally dies, I'll have a spot in his will too. The promise of that significant inheritance is the only thing that keeps me going most days. It doesn't seem to matter how well I do in school or sports. My father is only interested in my nephew's accomplishments. Unfortunately for me, I wasn't born into this family as a Davis twin. Davis redacted don't get the same royal treatment. I'll show them all someday though. I'm better than all of them put together. They'll see. I couldn't wait to go to one of their precious Sunday brunches, as a more successful businessman than Sutton will ever be. I wanted to make him regret treating me as inferior to these bumbling morons. My head lifted slightly of its own accord, and my lips turned up into what likely looked like a sadistic smile. Smiling was a strange sensation that felt foreign to me because I haven't done it for months. A plan was beginning to take shape in my mind. I'm done kissing up to Sutton and his wife Janice, clamoring for any sliver of attention or financial assistance they were willing to give me. Instead, I'm going to ruin Sutton Davis. I'll take over his pride and joy, his company Davis Industries, and leave it to my firstborn son. The realization seeped in that I might be an evil genius as I pondered the simplicity of my plan. By stealing his business right out from under him, I would be able to get even with my father, my half-brothers, and my nephews all in one grand maneuver. They would never ignore me or treat me as less than again. It was impossible to keep the maniacal laugh from bubbling up when I decided that maybe I would keep my father on as an employee after my hostile takeover of his company. After all, we would need someone to keep the bathrooms clean. Tyler. I stared at the instant message from Lexi, unsure how to respond. She'd been gone for months. We were well into our senior year of high school, and Tristan was keeping busy redacted his way through the cheerleaders, possibly 2 at a time if the latest rumors were true.
Hi.
It was such a simple word, yet it meant the world to me. Had she accidentally sent it to me, rather than my brother? Should I apologize for what she witnessed on the dock? Or was it best not to bring it up at all? Deciding I shouldn't wait too long to respond lest she think I wasn't at my computer, I hastily typed back. Hi. My finger hovered over the return key. I longed to say more but decided to let her lead the conversation. I tapped the button to send it before I could chicken out or overthink it further.
How is school going?
It was a boring, polite question. I knew then that she was aware she was talking to me, rather than Tristan. Surely she would have a more intimate discussion with him than this. Even though the topic was mundane and harmless, my pulse was racing. I took a deep breath in a feeble attempt to calm my jittery nerves before typing back. It's okay. They are trying to pressure me to apply for colleges, but I don't even want to think about it.
Same here.
She responded almost instantly. I smiled from ear to ear until the second ding came.
I want to go someplace close to Tristan, but he can't make up his mind until he sees how many sports scholarships he gets.
The thought of this incredible person planning her life around my cheating jerk of a brother made my stomach feel queasy. The temptation to tattle to her about his indiscretions was almost overwhelming, but I knew nothing positive would come from it. The thought of Tristan hating me didn't bother me nearly as much as the thought of never seeing Lexi again. If Tristan broke her heart, I wouldn't have any contact with her at all. Even though this was at best a tentative connection, it was better than not having her in my life at all. I couldn't come up with an appropriate response to her revelation that she would be following Tristan to college, but Lexi saved me from having to by dinging in again.
I hate to ask you this, but are you still keeping an eye on Tristan for me? I know girls are probably constantly throwing themselves at him. We haven't been able to be together as much as I would like because of school stuff. Will you remind him about me if he starts to get distracted?
Her words hit me like a physical blow to my gut. I had no idea how to respond. If I was honest and told her he was already redacted with any willing girl with a short enough skirt, I risked losing her from my life completely. But if I told her I was watching him for her, would she blame me if she found out the truth? As much as I hated lying to her, the thought of losing her was unbearable. Sure, I typed and sent. Not wanting her to sign off, I quickly added, "Which colleges have you applied to?" She answered with a few respectable institutions. I responded appropriately and kept the conversation going well into the night. That's right, I stayed up well past midnight chatting with the love of my life, who also happened to be my twin brother's girlfriend. I didn't feel the least bit guilty. especially since I had it on good authority that Tristan had a girl redacted after school today. He was out now, most likely getting redacted. His absence explained why Lexi had contacted me. I didn't care though. She had reached out to me, and that was all that mattered. I hoped this conversation meant that she had forgiven me for what she witnessed with Sarah on the dock last summer. Tristan clearly still hadn't gotten over it, but he usually ignored me anyway, so his open hostility towards me wasn't that much different than the norm. Just when I thought Lexi was going to let me off the hook without mentioning what she witnessed that fateful night, she said,
"I'm really worried about Sarah."
My breath hitched and my already wildly thumping heart went into overdrive. Queasiness kicked in as I realized what Lexi must think of me. The flashing prompter was mocking me, reminding me that I needed to respond, but I didn't know what to say. I couldn't justify my actions, but I knew she was waiting for me to say something. I typed I shouldn't have let things go so far, but I backspaced to delete it without sending. Trying again, I said simply, "I'm sorry." I stared at the words for a long moment. They were simple and effective. Taking a deep breath, I hit the return key to send my apology before I could chicken out again. I literally sat on my hands as I awaited her response.
"I know that what happened wasn't all your fault."
I sagged with relief when I read her response. Lexi was letting me off the hook too easily for my part in the fiasco at the dock, but I wasn't going to argue with her about it.
"Sarah is rebelling to the extreme. It's almost like she's doing anything she can think of to get into trouble. I'm really concerned about her."
I grabbed onto this topic, hoping to eliminate any further discussion of my part in her fall from grace. "What's going on?" I asked the question, truly concerned about Sarah's well-being, but mostly wanting to be the comforting shoulder that Lexi leaned on. Lexi proceeded to tell me all about Sarah cutting class, experimenting with pot edibles, yelling at their parents, dating the wrong guys. I cringed at this one, and generally rebelling in every way imaginable. It was obvious as Lexi rapid-fire dinged messages in my direction that she needed someone to talk to about this, so I just let her vent. If my brother didn't want to take the time to listen to his girlfriend's worries, I would happily fill in the void. Maybe one of these days she would realize that she should be involved with the friend who always has time to listen to her, rather than the playboy who couldn't be bothered. When the regular dings paused, I encouraged her to go on by asking, "Do you think it's just a phase?"
"I hope so."
She quickly responded before adding,
"Thank you so much for listening to my rambling. I'm so glad to have you as a friend."
I chose to ignore the "as a friend" portion of her comment and instead savored the sentiment behind her words. Lexi appreciated me and was glad to have me in her life. It was more positive attention than I'd ever before had from her. "You're not rambling. I love chatting with you. I'm always here for you, Lexi," I promised her, hoping that my typewritten comments conveyed even a fraction of the sentiment behind them.
"Maybe we can continue to chat like this. I don't think Tristan would mind since he knows there isn't anything romantic between us."
Again, I chose to ignore the last part of her message and focused only on the part I liked. "I would love that." As soon as I clicked to send it, I wondered if the exclamation point had been too much. I tried my best not to overthink it as I watched the 3 dots and waited to see what she would say next.
"Same time tomorrow night?"
I was too manly to squeal, but I suddenly understood the urge to do so. "Absolutely," I responded, leaving off the exclamation point this time, not wanting to seem too excited. Practically giddy, I decided to throw caution to the wind by sending another message. "It's a date."
"Talk then. Night."
She accentuated her post with the winking emoji. "Good night, Lexi." I added the moon and star emojis at the end of my sign-off before closing my laptop and resting back on my bed with my hands behind my head. I couldn't wipe the smile off my face as I stared up at my white popcorn ceiling. This had easily been one of the best nights of my life. If Tristan didn't watch his back, his loyal and currently friend-zoned brother would steal Lexi right out from under him. For the first time in forever, I began to hope that I might beat my twin at something. I intended to win Lexi's heart, and suddenly it seemed almost possible. Tristan. My poor pathetic redacted brother thinks he can steal Lexi from me. It's never going to happen, but I find it amusing that he seems to be of the opinion that it is within the realm of possibility. He's delusional. I'm sure he thought I would put a stop to his and Lexi's nightly chats, but the thing is, I don't even feel threatened by him. Normally I wouldn't want my girl talking to another guy, but it's almost like Ty isn't even a real dude. I don't feel in any way threatened by his crush on Lexi, and that knowledge irks him to no end. He goads me with little details about his conversations with her. I know he just wants to get a reaction from me about it, so I refuse to play along with his little game. At last Sunday's family brunch at our grandparents' estate, when our cousin Belle, don't call me Annabelle, requested Diet Coke, he brought up how much Lexi likes Diet Coke. He then gave me that secret little smile that said he thinks he knows my girlfriend better than I do. I knew exactly what he was up to, so I didn't let it bother me. Rather than get riled up, I returned his smug grin and one-upped it. I lifted one of my dark brows in his direction as I thought about redacted Lexi. I knew my pupils would darken as I remembered our last encounter and anticipated our next. Ty knew exactly what that particular look meant, and although he tried to pretend like it didn't bother him, I could tell by his narrowed gaze that he was furious. When I gave him a little smile as I pictured Lexi redacted, I thought he might actually come over our grandmother's polished table to strangle me. Somehow he refrained, but I knew it must have taken every bit of restraint he could muster. It wasn't any secret that Ty redacted Lexi, but I knew nothing serious would ever happen between them. She wanted me, and she always would. Redacted would freeze over before she would choose him over me, and it was high time that my brother accepted that fact. Sitting at my grandfather's massive mahogany table, I decided that I might need to nudge Ty towards realizing that Lexi is, and always would be, mine, not his. She was planning to visit Harbor Shores next weekend so we could have some much-needed redacted contact. I knew exactly what I needed to do to make sure my brother caught on to the fact that Lexi's redacted and caring heart belonged to me and only me. It was almost as if the stars aligned to make sure that I could bring my plan to fruition. Our parents were out on one of their monthly date nights with my aunt and uncle. It did dawn on me that Ty and I would never be as close as my father and his twin brother, but that ship had sailed long ago, so there was no use in worrying about it now. I brought Lexi up to my room, which was a special treat, since my parents normally didn't allow us to go upstairs alone together. She perused my room slowly, examining my sports trophies and picking up the framed snapshots on my desk of me with friends. I let her take her time since we weren't in any hurry. My parents would be out for hours. Sitting down on the end of my bed, I watched Lexi open my closet door and trail her fingers along my hanging clothes. She inhaled deeply.
It smells like you in here.
By the smile she beamed at me, I could tell that was a compliment, but I pretended to be self-conscious. Is that a good thing?
Very.
She grinned in my direction, letting me know that she approved. She sat down beside me on my bed. We both knew what was going to happen, but I wanted it to be on her terms. As I had suspected, it didn't take her long to kiss me. Our kisses were tentative at first as we reacquainted ourselves with each other after so long without seeing each other. She tasted amazing, but I held myself back, savoring the moment. I was thankful that I had redacted with other girls while we had been apart. Otherwise, I might have embarrassed myself by redacted too soon. Lexi was that special to me. She was different than the other girls I was with. The others were almost like placeholders for the real thing. Lexi was the one. It was her touch I craved even when I was with someone else. It dawned on me in that moment as our tongues entwined. I pulled back to look her in the eyes. I love you. My voice sounded croaky, barely above a whisper. The gaze she gave back to me was pure adoration. I wondered then if I had made a mistake, but it was too late to take it back.
I love you too.
She lunged then, redacted and kissing me hungrily. Soon I was so lost in redacted that I forgot to worry about my hastily uttered admission of love. We were still fully clothed but redacted. She tipped her head back as I kissed her neck. When my redacted. You're so redacted, I breathed out as her mouth found mine once more and redacted. She redacted. It felt like it had been ages since I'd been with anyone, even though it had been less than 2 days. Other girls were a mere shadow of Lexi though. Being with anyone else was nothing compared to this redacted. I was desperate to redacted, but I knew I redacted. I wanted her redacted my name as she redacted before I redacted. Since my loser of a brother rarely went out, I was fairly confident that he was in his room and able to hear our redacted sounds. Once Ty heard Lexi redacted for me, he would surely realize that he didn't stand a chance with her. Almost as if she could read my thoughts, Lexi's redacted. She pulled back to look at me before asking the one-word question.
Tyler?
I knew she wanted to know if he was within hearing distance of us. He might be in his room, I admitted to her, which made her face fall into a mixture of fear and concern for his feelings. I hid my annoyance over her worrying about Ty at such a time by reassuring her. There's a bathroom between our rooms and we will hear if he goes in there. I didn't bother to point out that the bathroom only bordered half of our shared wall. The other half was merely separated by a thin layer of drywall. I was certain that Ty could hear our redacted sounds, and I wanted him to. He needed to know that Lexi belonged to me, so he could let go of his unhealthy obsession with her. In my mind, I justified letting him hear us redacted because I knew it was best for both of them. Ty needed to move on, and this would save Lexi from having to hurt his feelings by turning him down. She was too kind-hearted to crush him like that. Lexi turned to look at the wall as if weighing her options.
You're sure?
She seemed to want additional reassurance that Ty wouldn't hear us. Not wanting to be a total jerk, I merely nodded. That was evidently enough confirmation for Lexi because she reached down to redacted. All thoughts of Ty were soon forgotten as we became lost in each other. We had tossed our redacted and were lying face to face on my bed with our redacted. The anticipation of what was yet to come hung so heavily in the room's atmosphere, it was almost overwhelming.
Redacted to me, Tristan.
Lexi breathed out the invitation. Happy to oblige, I redacted. My redacted as I kissed her deeply. I wanted nothing more than to redacted, but drawing out the excitement of this delicious foreplay was absolutely blissful. Unable to hold back any longer, I redacted. Her legs were redacted. I knew from past experience with her redacted. Just as I started to redact it, Lexi's eyes sprang open.
Condom.
She shouted near my ear, startling me. I pulled back to smile at her. It's a good thing you keep your sense about you because I completely lose my mind when I'm with you. Rolling over, I reached under my bed to retrieve the box of condoms. When I reached in, I couldn't believe the box was empty, so I turned it over and shook it. Redacted. I yelled, unable to believe my rotten luck. When I turned and noticed Lexi's wide-eyed, concerned look, I showed her the empty box. Her brow furrowed.
Didn't you buy that box right before I left last time?
My cheeks burned hot with shame as I scrambled to devise an excuse about where all those condoms had gone. Ty must have found my stash and taken them. It was the best I could come up with on the fly. Lexi's lashes fluttered quickly, as if she were having trouble comprehending that Ty might actually redacted. I couldn't blame her for that. The idea was preposterous, especially since we had seen firsthand that Ty's limited redacted involved redacted from Lexi's kid sister, but it was too late to change my story now. Evidently coming to terms with the possibility, Lexi tentatively suggested.
Maybe you could go over and ask him to give you 1 or 2 back.
I groaned at her suggestive comment. Certain that Ty didn't have any condoms and that he wouldn't give me one if he did, I said, I'm sure he's used them all. My lies were becoming more and more unbelievable, but I had backed myself into a proverbial corner. After giving Lexi a lingering kiss on the lips, I leaned back and suggested, I can get dressed and make a quick trip into town to the drugstore. As much as I couldn't stand to leave her right now, it would be easier to drive to the store than to cross the threshold of our rooms and ask Ty for help. I hated the way Lexi's face fell and couldn't believe I had let myself get into this situation. I could only pray that she wouldn't bring up the missing condoms with Ty during their nightly chats. He would probably love to plant a seed of doubt in her mind about my fidelity. Seeming to make a decision, Lexi leaned in to give me a deep kiss. My redacted in her direction. Forcing myself to pull back, I said, I better go or I won't be able to pry myself away.
It's okay.
She whispered so quietly, I almost wasn't sure if she had actually spoken. When her words registered, I wasn't sure if I comprehended her meaning correctly. Deciding that I must have misunderstood her insinuation, I pulled back to kiss the tip of her nose and promised, I'll be right back.
Stay.
She pleaded, leaving little doubt about her meaning now. I looked into her trusting gaze, completely stunned. You're sure? I asked her, already feeling like my heart might thump its way right out of my chest.
Yes.
She breathed out, reaching down to redacted to eradicate any doubt about her answer. Somehow my redacted at her touch. I wouldn't have believed it to be possible, but with each passing moment, I wanted Lexi more.
Touch me.
Her whispered words were all of the encouragement I needed. I redacted. We redacted with no barriers between us for the very first time. It was like nothing I had ever felt before. Within moments of redacted, I lost control. I redacted into her and she met me redacted. We redacted with an abandon I had never before experienced. All rational thought disappeared as our bodies redacted in perfect harmony. When she redacted, all I could think of was redacted. Tipping my head back in redacted, I proclaimed my love and redacted. Our bodies were redacted as we rested together. Unable to keep it inside, a rumbling laugh came out from deep within my belly.
You're laughing at a time like this?
Lexi smacked playfully at my redacted. I've just never felt anything like that, I revealed, feeling oddly vulnerable. Lexi's features softened then, making her look even more stunningly beautiful.
Me neither.
Her smile actually managed to look shy, despite our redacted. I couldn't even imagine how loud our redacted had been, and I didn't care. If Ty had heard us, he wouldn't have any doubt left in his mind that Lexi belonged to me. It was only when I rolled over onto my back and stared at my ceiling that the realization that we had just had unprotected redacted began to creep in. My friends would refer to what we had done as redacted, but that seemed too crass of a description for the magical experience we'd just had. Of course, I'd had all the classes that warned us to practice safe redacted if we couldn't abstain, but in the moment, I hadn't been able to resist Lexi. Turning to look at her and seeing her grin back in my direction, I realized that it didn't matter. Lexi was worth the risk. Besides, it had only been one time, and I would gently suggest that she go on the pill before she came to visit again. Now that I knew what it was like to have redacted with Lexi without redacted, it would be nearly impossible to go back to wearing a redacted. I would still wear one with other girls to keep from getting any diseases, so this would be a special treat I would only share with Lexi. Lexi bit her lower lip and said,
We probably shouldn't have done that.
Seeing that first bit of concern emerge on her face made my confidence surge. Wanting to reassure her, I promised, it will be fine. I kissed her forehead to seal my words, even as I silently prayed that they were true. Tyler. I covered my head with my pillow and tried to drown out the sound of my brother redacted the girl of my dreams in the room next to mine. Eventually, I put on my headphones in an effort to escape their redacted, but what I imagined happening next door was almost worse than actually hearing it, almost. It was obvious that Tristan was making his claim on Lexi known in the most primal way imaginable. He wanted me to know that she was his, and the realization that it was true made my blood boil with fury. Even though I turned up my music, the redacted against the wall was like a constant bass beat in my mind. I balled my hands into fists so tight my short fingernails dug into my palms as I dreamed of pummeling Tristan into oblivion. The only thing that kept me from barging over there and ripping his redacted off her was the fear that Lexi would never forgive me for it. He was redacted, my sweet Lexi, like redacted. She deserved to be loved and cherished. If I was ever lucky enough to have her redacted, I would show her how a real man redacted a woman. Tristan was obviously making it all about himself, but I would put her first. When I heard her redacted his name, I turned my music up to a deafening level. I was unwilling to acknowledge that she might actually be enjoying my brother's caveman-esque redacted. Lexi was a lady to her core. I was sure of it, but if she was secretly a redacted, I needed her to be in my redacted, not Tristan's. I knew all the way down to my bones that she was meant to be with me, rather than him. Having had my fill of overhearing them redacted, I tossed off my headphones and made a beeline for my door. Unfortunately, the only way I could escape this torture was down the hallway. I was forced to walk past Tristan's door in order to make it to the stairs that would lead me to the main level of our house. I ducked my head and scurried past in a vain attempt not to hear any more of their redacted. Proving that my impossibly bad luck extended even farther than I could have imagined, I managed to be right outside my brother's room during their redacted. When Tristan shouted out how much he loved Lexi in the midst of redacted, bile rose up in my throat. I bolted down the stairs in an effort to keep from actually retching in the hallway beside his room. Once outside, I gulped in the cool fresh air coming in off the lake. Bending to rest my hands on my knees, I took deep breaths and tried to focus on not vomiting. When I finally got my nausea under control, I physically cringed at what I had just heard. Surely Tristan wasn't always that vocal when he redacted, was he? Part of his volume had most likely been for my benefit, but at the end he had obviously truly redacted. As much as I hated to admit it, Lexi had sounded like she was right there with him, floating in redacted. My mind was out of control, wondering why they had both redacted. The only logical explanation I could devise was that they were experimenting with something new, likely something forbidden. This time I didn't have the opportunity to even attempt to control the rising bile. In a flash I darted to the side of the house and vomited behind my mom's favorite honeysuckle bush. My fist shook as I tried to spit the bitter taste from my mouth. I swiped the back of my hand across my lips, even as I wondered if Tristan had pressured her into doing something she wasn't sure about. If he had hurt her, I really would kill him. Not wanting to be around when they emerged from their love cocoon, I stumbled out towards the lakeshore. Something about the sounds and smells of the lake had always calmed me, but tonight even the inky water's magic couldn't give me a reprieve from my aching heart. I plopped down on a piece of driftwood and tossed rocks towards the water. It was a mindless activity that allowed me to face my reality. Deep down I knew what I needed to do, but I didn't know if I had the strength. Closing my eyes, I took a deep stuttering breath and steeled my resolve. Silently, I vowed to do what I knew was necessary in order to keep my sanity intact. I was going to remove Lexi from my heart to make room for someone who actually wanted to be there. In the following weeks, I remained determined to keep my resolution to forget about Lexi and move on. The problem was that no matter how much I wanted to not care about her and told myself that I shouldn't have feelings for her, I loved her deeply and probably always would. The twin facts that my feelings were unrequited and that Lexi loved Tristan made the sting of my inability to get over her dig that much deeper. I kept trying to force my heart into submission, but it was even more stubborn than I could have imagined. Proving that she was stubborn too, Lexi continued to try to bait me into instant message conversations. I had assumed that after I ignored her conversation starters a few times that she would give up. Today's one-sided message streak read,
Are you mad at me? What did I do? I thought we were friends. I'm sorry. Please talk to me.
My fingers hovered over the keyboard, aching to respond, but my brain wouldn't allow them to type. I knew that I needed to remain strong. If I started talking to her again, I would be right back to the pathetic place we seemed to thrive in, with me loving her and her loving him. Not that we weren't still there now, but at least I was trying to maintain some dignity. If I gave in and talked to her, I would lose any tiny bit of ground I had managed to gain in my efforts to get over her. Cussing under my breath, I slammed my laptop shut. This shouldn't be so hard. Once my redacted of a brother decided he was done with Lexi, he probably wouldn't give her a second thought. Why did I have to be the redacted sensitive one? I knew that to truly get over Lexi, I would need to find another girl to focus my attention on. The problem was that no other girls interested me like Lexi did. Lexi was witty and smart, impossibly beautiful, kind and funny. She was my everything. Other girls looked like pale vanilla cardboard cutouts in comparison to her. It dawned on me then that this was precisely my problem. I compared other girls to Lexi, and they always came up short because Lexi was perfect, except for the fact that she redacted after Tristan. I couldn't really blame her for that though, because all girls wanted Tristan for some strange reason. I didn't get it, and probably never would, but my confusion didn't change the fact that ladies found my twin to be irresistible. Not trusting my willpower, I avoided my computer for the next several weeks. I might not be able to completely oust Lexi from my heart or mind, but it wouldn't be for a lack of trying. Numbness overtook me as I shuffled through my days at school. It was like all of the simple pleasures had been sapped from my life. I wanted to care and be involved, but I just didn't have the energy. This complete disconnection must be what it's like to be depressed. I knew I should be concerned about it, but I couldn't drum up the energy to care. It was like my entire being had turned into an enormous vacuous void. My parents tried to ask the right questions to get me to talk, but I didn't have any answers for them. Even though I could see the worry in their eyes, I couldn't do anything to alleviate it. I could barely muster the energy to get out of bed and make it through my school days. Anything beyond that was too much. Despite the haze of my depression, I sensed the shift in Tristan. My normally top-of-the-world happy-go-lucky twin was going through something. It seemed unlikely that there really was some twin connection between us, but the last thing I expected to drag me out of my self-contained bubble of desperation was my brother. "What the redacted is wrong with you?" It was the first words I had uttered in weeks, outside of one-word responses to questions. Tristan looked right through me as if he couldn't even see me. He was in our bathroom during my time. We had a finely tuned schedule that had been working seamlessly for years and allowed us to avoid interacting with each other. Something was definitely up with him. When he just stood there staring at the wall behind me, my rage at him surfaced. "Redacted," I said before storming back to my room. Although my words to him had been anything but friendly, it felt amazing to be back among the living. Fury was an emotion, and it was more than my numbness had allowed me to feel in a long time. My fists were itching to hit something and my heart was racing. My hatred towards my brother had sucked me back from the void. When I went downstairs, I greeted my stunned parents with a "good morning." Mom's short blonde hair was standing out in wild spikes that she hadn't yet tamed, so I teased her lightly. "Nice hair." She ran her fingers through it self-consciously and bugged her eyes out at Dad. I could tell they weren't sure how to react to having their son's personality suddenly return. I plopped down on a bar stool and actually tasted my peanut butter toast with Mom's homemade blackberry jam, rather than just mindlessly shoveling it in. "Delicious jelly," I told her before kissing her cheek. She appeared to be on the verge of crying.
Thanks, sweetheart.
My parents shared a long, meaningful look. I could tell they were thrilled to see me being more than the mere shell of a human I had been lately. Dad cleared his throat before patting me on the back. "It's good to have you back, son." "It's good to be back," I told them honestly, before tossing a green apple in the air, catching it, and hoisting my backpack onto a shoulder to head out for school. Little did I know my newly found life without soul-sucking depression was soon going to come crashing down. Everyone at school noticed my triumphant return. Even people who normally didn't acknowledge me smiled when I made eye contact. My teachers positively lit up when I participated in class. It really was like I had a second chance at life, and I didn't plan to waste this one. During my dark phase, I had fallen behind on my schoolwork. Although I wouldn't have colleges falling over themselves to give me sports scholarships like my brother did, I didn't want to flunk out of school during my senior year. I intended to graduate, and in order to do that, I needed to log some major hours of makeup work. First on my agenda was a literature paper that had been due last week. Mrs. Strawfield was normally a stickler for punctuality, but she had been so delighted by the lifting of my depression that I had easily been able to charm her into granting me a one-time extension. My laptop hadn't been on in a long time, and I had the feeling there would be missed messages of escalating annoyance from Lexi. Knowing that I needed to remain strong in my mission not to interact with her, I turned on the computer. My breath became shallow as I waited for the laptop to go through its booting up sequence. Determined to remain strong, I told myself that I would close out the instant message program as soon as it popped up, without reading anything from Lexi. My plan didn't matter because my eyes were faster than my fingers. Before I had the chance to click the IM box closed, I registered some of the words she had written.
"Please. I need you."
My eyes darted to the date. She had reached out to say she needed me yesterday. I couldn't stop the bubble of hope that floated into my head. This timing coincided perfectly with Tristan being upset. Had they broken up? I scrolled up as fast as my finger would go. After reading the entire chain I had missed from her, I wasn't any closer to knowing what was wrong. She had gone from pleading to annoyed to angry, and back to pleading with me not to ignore her. I could see by the green radial button that she was online. My resolve to not speak to her had completely dissipated when she said she needed me. If she and Tristan had broken up, I would gladly be there to pick up the shattered pieces of her heart. Now she would get to see what it was like when a man truly cared about her and treated her right. "What's up?" I tried to sound cool and casual, even though my palms were sweating and my pulse was racing.
"Where have you been?"
She answered immediately. The 3 dots lit up to indicate more was coming, as I scrambled to think of a justifiable explanation for my absence. Deciding to try to become a man of mystery in her eyes, I responded with, "I've been off the grid for a bit." I couldn't help but smile at my ingenious answer. It sounded much more intriguing to be off the grid than to admit I had been spiraling into a depression, longing for her. The dots flashed and stopped and flashed and stopped again. I watched them with laser focus, wondering if she was typing something, deleting it and rewording, or if she was pausing between sentences in a very long paragraph. I jiggled my knee as I waited for her to send what she was working on. The wait was torture. Finally, words flashed on my screen with a corresponding ding to indicate their arrival. Her reply was much shorter than I anticipated. It was only 2 simple words, yet they were filled with earth-shattering, life-altering meaning.
I'm pregnant.
I stared at the screen for a long time, trying to make sense of her admission. This simply couldn't be. My sweet, beautiful, innocent Lexi was pregnant at 18. This would ruin her life, and it was all Tristan's fault. The words on the screen swirled before me as my eyes tried to convince my brain that they were really there, flashing their truth and mocking me. Nausea overwhelmed me, and I had to lower my head to my legs to keep from passing out. I have no idea how long I stayed in that position, probably looking like I was kissing my butt goodbye. I was shaking from head to toe with fear for Lexi and pent-up rage towards my twin. Redundant ringing in my ears finally brought me out of my dissociative state. Lifting my head, I tried to focus my watery eyes on the flurry of messages Lexi had sent since I had mentally checked out. Although I wasn't coherent enough to read all of her messages, I was able to comprehend bits and pieces. She was scared, of course. She didn't want to tell her parents for fear of their reaction. The message that caught and held my attention, though, was the one that said she was worried about how this would affect Tristan's future. Just when I thought it wasn't possible to be any more stunned, Lexi told me that her reaction to this bombshell pregnancy news was to worry that it might alter my precious brother's future. Unbelievable. Tristan was irresponsible enough to get her into this situation at too young of an age, and her only concern was about him. My hands were shaking too much to type properly, so I used 2 fingers to tap out my response with the caps lock button on. I'm going to redact him. Lexi immediately typed back.
No.
I shouldn't have been surprised, but I really would have thought she'd be at least a little angry with Tristan, especially since it was obvious by his zombie-like state from the past couple of days that he wasn't emotionally supporting her like he should be. Staring at the screen, I tried to make sense of the jumble of words Lexi had rapid-fired back. The gist of it seemed to be that she didn't blame him at all for this predicament. When her words registered in my brain that it had been her idea for them to have redacted without a condom, I placed a hand over my mouth and bolted to retch in my trash can. I stood there swaying for a long time. A fine sheen of sweat was coating my entire body. Even though I had never passed out before, I was confident that this was precisely what it felt like right before one checked out of consciousness for a brief break from reality. Somehow I didn't pass out, even though I would have welcomed the oblivion of being unaware of Lexi's pregnancy. Tristan flushed the toilet in our shared bathroom and my eyes darted to the closed door. I was in no physical state to fight, and Tristan could easily beat me on my best day, but my mind didn't care to be rational. In 2 long strides I was across the room. Flinging open the bathroom door, I shouted at Tristan, "How could you?" Proving that he was even more out of it than I was, Tristan didn't even look startled by my intrusion. I didn't care that he looked lost and scared as he stared at his reflection in the mirror. I wanted him to look as pained as I felt. Not hesitating, I lunged at him and pummeled his face and gut. He let me do it and didn't raise his hands to block me or fight back. His lack of resistance should have taken the fun out of it, but I was releasing years of pent-up frustration, and he was my punching bag. By the time our dad made it upstairs to pull me off him, Tristan's perfect face was a bloody mess. Rather than feeling guilty for fighting a man who refused to fight back, I only wanted to beat him more. He deserved it for what he had done to Lexi, and I would never forgive him for it. I sulked in my room, pacing back and forth like a panther. Brindle, the cat my mom had adopted last week, who had instantly taken a liking to me, had his fill of my nervous energy and meowed his demand to be let out of my room. It wasn't lost on me that even my mother's endless parade of rescued animals couldn't stand to be near me for too long. When the ding that I'd been expecting finally rang out, I went to see how mad she was. Of course, Tristan had tattled on me to her. Her message was brief and to the point.
You beat him up? How could you? I trusted you. Stay away from him. And me.
Hating my brother more than ever, I looked at the ceiling and shouted, "Redacted." Tristan. I deserved the split lip, black eye, and most likely cracked ribs Ty gave me. That's why I didn't fight back. If I had chosen to, I could have kicked his butt, but I wanted him to hit me. It felt right to be punished. It had been so stupid of me to get into this predicament. Guilt overwhelmed me for what Lexi was going through, but even more than that, I was worried about what it meant to our futures, especially mine. Lexi was a special girl and I cared deeply for her, but that didn't mean I was ready to give up my future to marry her and raise a child. There was no denying that my reaction had been terrible when Lexi had told me the news that she was pregnant. Fear had iced my veins as my pulse pounded in my head. A baby was the last thing either of us needed right now, so I told Lexi that I would get the money to her to take care of the problem. In hindsight, it's easy for me to see that this wasn't the right way to respond, but at the time I had been desperate to make this all go away. I wasn't ready to have a child. I had too bright of a future to become a teenaged father. My life was just getting started, and I had so much potential to achieve. It simply wasn't an option for me to skip college, accept a dead-end job, and begin raising a family. I was meant for more than that. I knew it in my gut. Once I had a bit of time to process the earth-shattering baby news, I realized that I needed to make Lexi see how having a child would mess up her life, rather than simply focusing on how it would ruin mine. "Don't you want to go to college?" I asked her.
Of course.
Her voice was barely above a whisper. She was as frightened about this as I was. I just had to convince her to see reason and acknowledge that we simply couldn't be parents right now. "What about a career? Don't you picture yourself being a strong businesswoman?" I knew from our late-night summertime chats in the loft of my dad's boat barn that she did. Rather than answering my rhetorical question, I heard her sniffle into the phone. She was obviously crying as she thought about everything she would have to give up if she saw this pregnancy through to the end. "Going for the jugular," I added. "If we're forced to raise a child with each other at this young age, we'll grow to hate each other." Finding her voice, Lexi fought back.
You said we were meant to be together forever.
She accused before adding,
This is just moving the timeline up a little.
"A little?" It came out in a splutter because I was stunned that she was actually pushing for us to raise this baby together as a happy little family. "We are still in high school. We aren't ready for this." I spoke rationally, probably perfectly mimicking what our parents would sound like when they found out. Lexi was fully sobbing into the phone by that point, so I knew I needed to say something to appease her. "We'll raise a family together when the time is right. After we're out of college and established in our careers. We can't right now, Lexi. We're still just kids ourselves."
We were adult enough to get into this situation.
She pointed out rationally. Just as calmly, I said, "Yes, and we need to be mature enough to realize that we aren't prepared to handle parenthood at this point in our lives."
Well, what do you want me to do? Get rid of my baby?
She practically screeched into the phone. I cringed from both the noise and her reference to the problem as her baby. This was going to be more difficult than I had imagined. It's probably not even developed enough yet to be considered a baby. It's just a fetus. My attempt to placate her only served to make things worse.
Not a baby?
She shouted. I held the phone out away from my ear in an attempt to keep her near-deafening squawking at bay.
How can you say that? What the redacted is it then?
I'd never heard Lexi cuss, so I knew she was beyond upset. The logical side of my brain said to try to calm her down, but the angry teenage hormones raging inside me were itching for a fight. Deep down, I knew this situation wasn't Lexi's fault, but I was beginning to feel like a trapped animal. "It's a huge problem," I shouted back at her. Intentionally lowering my voice, I added, "and you can fix it for everyone. I don't understand why you won't just make it disappear." I could feel the hot tears burning behind my eyes, so I struggled to keep them from falling or being audible in my voice.
Disappear?
Lexi's voice was filled with disbelief that I would suggest such a thing.
I'm not going to kill our baby.
I winced at her harsh choice of words.
I can't and I won't.
Her voice was filled with conviction, and I knew that now was not the time to try to sway her opinion. Changing gears, I shifted into my second choice out of our limited available options. We could always give it up for adoption to a family who wants a child and is ready to raise it. Even saying it out loud filled me with fear because this plan would force us to tell our parents about our predicament. I would much rather pay for Lexi to have a procedure to take care of the problem and be done with it. My heart knew that it wouldn't be that simple for Lexi, though. She already seemed attached to the blasted thing, which concerned me even more about going the adoption route. What if she gave birth and then wasn't willing to hand the baby over to its adoptive parents? My mind scrambled in search of a way to convince Lexi that keeping this baby was not a viable option for us at this point in our lives. I could feel my bright future being yanked away from me, even though I was willing to do anything to hold on to it. Opting to go with firm and decisive, I said, "We need to quickly figure out what we're going to do." Before she could suggest out loud what I suspected she wanted to happen, I added, "Getting married and raising a kid together is not an option right now." When I heard her sob on the other end of the phone, I knew without a doubt that was the exact scenario she had been hoping for. Just the thought of it made me feel like I was suffocating. I gulped in air before saying, "We both need a couple of days to think it over. I think once you've had a chance to really weigh our options, you'll see that I'm right. Talk soon." I signed off abruptly, not wanting to give her the chance to whine or try to cajole me into agreeing with her. Even as I jabbed my finger on the end call button, I could hear her escalating sobs. Guilt overwhelmed me for being such a redacted, but I needed some time to process all of this. Zombie-like was the only way to describe my demeanor. I went through the motions of my life, but my mind wasn't present. It was scrambling for ideas to get me out of this predicament with Lexi. The only solution I liked was one that she wouldn't even consider. The path she wanted to take would ruin the rest of my life, and hers. I had to devise a plan that would work for both of us. There had to be some way out of this that we could both agree on. When Ty came at me in our shared bathroom, I didn't even bother to fight back. The pain of his punches barely registered, but at least they made me feel something. I'd been on a numb autopilot setting since finding out Lexi was pregnant. After Dad pulled Ty off me, Mom came in to help me clean and bandage my cuts.
You're a mess.
Her lips were pinched together in displeasure. At my nod, she asked,
You going to tell me what's going on with you two, or do I have to figure it out on my own?
It's nothing, I lied, just one of our usual sibling disagreements. She narrowed her all-seeing eyes in my direction, letting me know that she wasn't buying that, but she didn't question me any further. That was one of the best things about my parents. They cared and wanted to be involved, but they didn't pry. They let us come to them with problems when we were ready to deal with them. Once Mom had me doctored up, she went to Ty's room and knocked on his door. I assumed she was giving him the same opportunity to share with her what was going on. I hoped he wouldn't tell her. As much as I dreaded telling my parents about Lexi's pregnancy, it wasn't Ty's news to share, so it wouldn't have been fair for him to reveal it. I heard Mom leave Ty's room and she didn't return to mine, so he evidently hadn't blabbed. As mad at him as I was, I had to give him credit for that. He was pretty good about not overstepping his bounds when it came to our parents. When Lexi's video chat rang in on my computer, my first instinct was to ignore it. Some strange part of me wanted her to see my battered face though, so my finger clicked the button to answer before I fully thought it through.
I hate it that we're fighting.
Lexi started in immediately. Tears were already streaming down her face. Me too, I said sincerely. She gasped and I knew she had just caught her first glimpse of my injuries.
What happened?
She asked. Her sky-blue eyes were wide and her hand had come up to cover her mouth. Ty was just expressing his displeasure over me knocking you up. I looked down at my beige shag carpet and tried to downplay how much Ty had overreacted.
This is all my fault.
Lexi wailed.
I never should have told him.
I couldn't agree with that last part more, but I didn't want her to blame herself. He's the one that lost his temper, not you. I tried to make her feel better. There was no denying that the blossoming friendship between Lexi and Ty had been getting on my nerves, so having her see this might be just the thing to keep them from being so chummy. Proving my theory right, Lexi said,
I'm going to give Ty a piece of my mind. He had no right to do that to you.
I gave her a half smile, even as I winced in pain for added effect. It's not his fault. I said aloud, although I was thinking the opposite. It was kind of fun to play the martyr for a bit. Having Lexi furious with Ty kept her from pressuring me into dealing with her pregnancy.
It is his fault.
She fired back.
I'm going to message him right now to let him know we are no longer friends.
Whatever you think is best, I said in my feeblest tone right before we signed off. Smiling to myself and thrilled by the newly formed wedge between Lexi and Ty, I rested back on my bed. I tossed a baseball in the air, seeing how close I could get it to my ceiling without touching it over and over. The repetitive motion was relaxing. Letting my mind go blank evidently worked because after a few minutes, I sat up with a brilliant idea. I suddenly knew exactly how to resolve this pregnancy problem. Tyler. It should have been obvious to me that something was up when Tristan didn't bother to fight me back. In hindsight, it's perfectly clear that he intended to use his injuries as a way to make Lexi hate me. If that was his plan, it worked splendidly because she wanted absolutely nothing to do with me. After her tirade of angry messages, I had tried to reach out several times, but she completely ignored me. Even though Tristan was the one that knocked her up, I somehow ended up being the one she hated. How did I always manage to become the bad guy? I slowly slid back into my depression. The hopelessness threatened to drown me again. Even though I knew it was consuming me, there was nothing I could do to stop it. Tristan, on the other hand, seemed to be back on top of the world. When I heard him whistling in the shower, I was tempted to race in there, yank back the curtain, and pummel him some more. Unfortunately, I didn't have the energy. Lexi was mad at me, and when she was absent from my life, it didn't feel worth living. Some small logical part of my brain knew that my happiness shouldn't hinge on how another person felt about me, but the emotional side of me didn't care. Lexi was my entire world, so when she ignored me, nothing else mattered. When Tristan opened the door that connected my bedroom to our shared bathroom, I should have been wary. It was unheard of for him to visit me, but the fog in my brain didn't allow that knowledge to register. I just wanted to be left alone in my misery. He leaned against the doorframe and gave me one of his signature smug smiles. If I'd had the energy, I would have punched that redacted grin right off his already battered face. You're in love with my girlfriend. He stated it matter-of-factly, like it was an everyday occurrence for him to chat with me about my unrequited feelings for Lexi. I rolled over flat on my back on my bed and closed my eyes in an attempt to make him disappear. It didn't work. Whatever he was planning to torture me with today wasn't something I cared to hear, so I reached for my headphones to drown him out. The edge of my bed lowered and my eyes popped open. My entire body went on high alert. Tristan was sitting beside me, smiling like he was my caring nursemaid. That must be tough. Tristan winced in what I can only assume was his weak attempt at looking empathetic to my predicament. Whatever he was up to, I wasn't falling for it. I rolled over to the other edge of my bed, giving him my back. The maneuver served two purposes. It let him know I wasn't falling for his fake attempt to reach out, and it gave me a quick means of escape if he was planning a sneak attack. Unfazed by the fact that I willfully ignored him, Tristan went on in an almost wistful-sounding voice. You love Lexi. She loves me. I'm not ready to be tied down with a wife and child. The way I see it, there is only one viable solution that works out the best for everyone. I didn't want to admit that my interest was piqued, but I kept my headphones off kilter on my head so that one ear was uncovered and able to hear his rambling. I have colleges knocking themselves over to give me sports scholarships. My main concern this year should be deciding which sport I want to pursue and which college's deal I want to accept, not going to birthing classes and learning how to change diapers. I couldn't deny the truth in his words, but he had gotten himself into this predicament. It wasn't my problem, and I had no interest in helping him out in any way. If the situation had been reversed, he would be mocking me for making such a stupid mistake. At least I hadn't yet stooped to that level. He went on like he knew I was hanging on his every word, despite my attempts to appear like I was ignoring him. You have a big future too. It had almost been a compliment. I felt too stunned to respond as I waited for the other shoe to drop. Going on without missing a beat, he added, but let's face it. There aren't any colleges chasing after you. You'll probably end up apprenticing with Dad and learning how to make boats for a living. It irked me that he had guessed my secret plan. I had always loved working with my hands, and someday taking over Dad's thriving business had recently turned into my long-term goal, but I hadn't yet told anyone about it. Somehow Tristan had figured it out as soon as, if not before, I did. The fact that he could ignore and hate me, yet still know me better than anyone else, was infuriating. You can skip the whole 4-year degree charade and jump right into business with Dad. You'll probably be making big bucks before I even finish with school. It was true, but I couldn't imagine why Tristan was admitting it. He was obviously after something, and I needed to know what. Taking a deep breath, Tristan went in for the kill. Your life is starting right away while I'll still just be a student. You'll have a steady income and a solid future. You're jumping into manhood. I'm still just a boy. I sensed what was coming even though I couldn't quite believe my ears. Surely he wasn't about to suggest the outlandish idea that had just popped into my head. It was unspeakable. Proving that he was just as thick-headed as I feared, he went on. You're ready to be a father now. I'm not. Unable to ignore him any longer, I turned to glare at him. I'm not ready to be a father. You're more prepared than I am. Tristan bugged his eyes out at me as he spoke. You're loyal and steady and dependable. Besides, you already love Lexi. I couldn't deny any of his words because they were all true, so I went with the only argument that made sense. But Lexi is in love with you, and the baby she is carrying is yours, not mine. We're identical twins. She can learn to love you. And the baby will have your genes. He was grasping at straws now, hoping I would bail him out of this bind. I had to admit that what he was offering was tempting. Lexi was everything I had ever wanted. I knew that even if I lived 1,000 years, I would never find someone that I loved as much as I loved her. But she didn't love me. She loved him. I shook my head sadly. She would never go for it. I can talk her into it, Tristan said confidently before standing and strolling to the bathroom to go back to his side of the room. The urge to smack that redacted grin right off his face was almost overwhelming. I couldn't deny, though, that a tiny bit of hope had begun to creep into my heart. The thought of rescuing Lexi from this predicament and having her grow to love me was almost irresistible. Shoving the realization that she would only be doing this for Tristan way out of my mind, I rolled back over onto my back with my hands crossed behind my head. As I gazed up at my ceiling, I couldn't keep the corners of my lips from tipping up into a small smile. For the first time ever, the girl of my dreams was suddenly within reach. Tristan. I couldn't believe how easy my plan had been to set into motion. It couldn't have gone any smoother with Ty if I had scripted our conversation myself. One down, one to go, I said aloud as I tossed my orange Nerf basketball into the hoop hanging on the back of my bedroom door. It swooshed through the net as I had known it would. Ty had been the easy one to convince, though. He was already madly in love with Lexi. It would take some finesse to sway Lexi into agreeing to my plan. I would need to handle this delicately to keep from decimating her feelings, but I needed to move quickly before things spiraled out of control. There was no way Lexi would get an abortion, and I feared that she wouldn't be able to give up the baby for adoption when the time came. I wasn't ready to marry her and raise the child, but Ty was. Having him step in would keep the baby in our family, which would allow me to watch the little tyke grow up. It would also give my parents the opportunity to get to know their grandchild. It really was the best-case scenario for everyone involved. I ticked off my talking points on my fingers as I prepared to face Lexi. My plan was to go there for a visit in person. This conversation was too important for a phone or video call. I might be a little dense when it comes to emotions, but even I sensed this was bound to be one of the most important discussions of our lives. When Saturday finally rolled around, I got up early to make the 2-hour drive inland to the middle of Michigan, where Lexi's family lived. I wanted to have plenty of time to chat with her and still make it back in time to prepare for tonight's game. Lexi's eyes lit up with excitement when her parents called her downstairs from her room. I knew she assumed that I was here to help her share the news of the pregnancy with her parents and offer to marry her. Even though we were well into the 21st century, Lexi and her family believed in old-school values. I had little doubt that her parents would be in agreement that I should marry Lexi and raise the baby with her. They would get their wish almost. We would simply substitute in my identical twin brother as the husband and father, and everyone would be happy. Lexi and I were ushered to the formal sitting room and offered a tray of iced tea and sugar cookies. Once we were finally alone, Lexi gushed.
I'm so glad you're here.
Not wanting her to take control of the conversation, I jumped in with my planned speech. When I got to the part about me not being mature enough to handle having a family, but Ty being ready, Lexi's head whipped back as if I had slapped her.
I know you're not suggesting what I think you mean by that.
Her eyes turned a frightening shade of icy blue as she glared at me. Why not? I raised my palms. It's the perfect solution.
Perfect for who?
Lexi yelled loud enough that her parents could probably hear her from the kitchen. Not giving me a chance to respond, she answered her own question.
Perfect for you. That's who. You get to skate off without taking any responsibility for your actions while your brother and I are left to clean up your mess.
It's not a mess. I knew my lame attempt to placate her had failed miserably when her cheeks flushed bright red with fury. Changing tactics, I tried to take her hand. She snatched it out of my reach. Ty loves you. He'll be a much better father to your baby than I would.
But I don't love him, and he isn't the father. You are.
She was screeching loud enough that I felt certain her parents would run in at any moment, having heard enough to figure out that she was knocked up. Let's just calm down? My attempt to soothe her only served to rile her up more.
Calm down. You want me to calm down after you just offered to swap me and our baby to your brother? What kind of disgusting pig are you? How could you think I would ever agree to this?
A giant tear welled over the rim of her eyelid and blazed a trail down her flushed cheek. Looking at my phone's display, I realized I needed to get moving to make it home in time to warm up for tonight's game. I'll give you some time to think about it, I told her as I stood up to leave. She whimpered but didn't try to stop me from leaving. I had known it wouldn't be easy to convince her. Maybe once she had a chance to weigh her options, she would realize this really was the best way and change her mind. Needing to make sure she fully understood my stance, I said, I won't give up my future to raise this baby with you, so if that is what you want, Ty is your only option. She gazed up at me, blinking blankly as if she couldn't quite process my words. Tears were now streaming freely down her face. Looking at her devastated expression made me feel like an absolute redacted. I'm sorry, but this is the way it has to be. With that, I left. As I walked out into the sunshine and climbed into my car, I realized that I had just officially tapped out. I now knew what it was like to have the weight of the world lifted from my shoulders. Tyler. I struggled to keep my hope at bay. There wasn't really any way Tristan could talk Lexi into agreeing with his outlandish plan. Was there? Even if he did somehow manage to convince her, our parents would never go for it. Everyone knew Lexi had been dating Tristan, so they wouldn't allow me to step in and raise a baby with her. As much as I would love seeing Tristan trying to weasel his way out of trouble this time, I knew that he would gladly leave Lexi to deal with the consequences of their actions on her own. The thought of swooping in to save her from my brother's mistreatment and in the process, helping her deal with the biggest predicament of her life was rather intriguing. If I put it all on the line and offered the rest of my life to Lexi and her baby, she would have to fall for me, right? That kind of sacrifice would have to make her see that I am the brother she should have chosen from the start. We would move past her error in judgment, and she would pick me every day from now on. I knew I was getting ahead of myself. Lexi wasn't likely to agree to this ridiculous idea, and even if she did, there would be parents to deal with. The likelihood of this working out in my favor, with me ending up with Lexi, was minuscule. As if she could hear my thoughts, Lexi chose that moment to instant message me. I knew Tristan had been to see her, so I lunged for my laptop to see what she thought about his plan. She didn't even bother with a greeting. Her message was short and to the point.
I assume you know what Tristan just suggested to me. Was this your idea?
My mouth hung open as I read her vaguely accusatory words. Shaking my head at the screen, I wondered why her first reaction was always to assume that I was at fault for everything, even when this entire fiasco was her precious Tristan's doing. I took a few deep, calming breaths to remind myself that she was under a lot of pressure. It wouldn't be in my own best interest to fire off a snappy response. I'm not the bad guy here, I told her, gently reminding her that Tristan was the one who had knocked her up and was trying to shirk his responsibilities. I, on the other hand, was considering swooping in to save the day. She could stand to be a little kinder to me. As if reading my mind, she quickly responded.
Sorry, I know this isn't your fault.
That was more like it. I smiled at the screen. It was about time she started noticing me as the hero of our story and Tristan as the true villain. Knowing she was frightened and ashamed, I wanted to let her off the hook for her part in all of this, so I typed back to her. It isn't yours either. My insinuation that my redacted brother was the one at fault was clear. I tapped my fingers anxiously on my desk as I waited to see if she would defend him. Surely she wouldn't. Would she? She didn't let him completely off the hook, but she also insisted on taking her share of the blame.
I should have known better than to make such a stupid mistake.
He should have too. I fired back before adding, plus now you're stuck dealing with the consequences while he is getting off scot-free.
I can't believe he's trying to drag you into this. It's our problem, not yours.
It was tempting to tell her that I would gladly make it my problem, but the timing didn't seem right. Plus, I wondered if she might misread my meaning since we were communicating non-verbally. As if reading my mind, Lexi pinged me.
Can we video chat? This conversation seems too important to type.
Rather than responding, I jogged to the bathroom and did a quick check of my looks in the mirror. After wetting my fingers under the faucet, I attempted to smooth down my unruly hair. Feeling a bit like a prissy girl, I returned to my room and plopped back down in my computer chair, before clicking the button to create a video connection. Lexi answered immediately. Even though she had obviously been crying, her fresh-faced beauty nearly took my breath away. It was all I could do to refrain from giving her a dreamy gaze. Some still rational part of me knew that now wasn't the time to go all moony-eyed over her.
Hi,
She said simply, trying to smile despite the sadness and stress shading her gorgeous blue eyes. Hi. You look like you're holding up well, especially considering the extreme stress you must be under. I gave her a warm smile, proud of myself for complimenting her without showing how smitten I was.
Right.
She rolled her eyes and chuckled.
I must look like a mess.
She tucked a stray lock of golden hair behind her ear. She could never look messy to me, but I refrained from saying so. Changing the subject, I asked, "Have you told anyone else about the pregnancy?"
No.
Her eyes bugged out at the mere suggestion of anyone else knowing about her situation. Calming her tone, she added,
I still need some time to figure out what I'm going to do.
"Understood," I nodded, trying to look supportive. "You have plenty of time before you have to share the news with anyone else," I reassured her, hoping that I was right. In all honesty, I wasn't sure how far along she was or how long it would be before her pregnancy began to show. She nodded, so my guess must not have been too far from the truth.
Everyone will be so disappointed in me.
Her voice was barely above a whisper, but my entire focus was on her, so I heard her clearly. "This isn't your fault," I reassured her. I wanted to make sure she knew that there was at least one person who didn't blame her at all for what had happened. In my book, there was only one guilty party, and he was trying to worm his way out of taking any responsibility for it.
It is though. Redacted without a condom was my idea. Tristan just went along with it.
Lexi practically wailed as I tried not to physically cringe at her words. The last thing I wanted to think about was my brother redacted her without even a thin layer of protection between them. Don't say that. I sounded like I was merely consoling her, but the truth was I really didn't want to hear any more about their unprotected redacted. Knowing that she needed further reassurance, I went on. He could have easily said no or waited until you could use protection. I won't let you shoulder the blame for this. Lexi nodded, but her emotions were already spiraling out of control. Seeming like she was looking directly at me through our video monitors, she moaned.
What am I going to do?
She let out a couple of sobs. I waited until she was quiet, then said calmly, "You're going to weigh all of your options and then pick the one that is best for you." I had almost said "and your baby," but stopped myself just in time. I didn't want to sound judgmental about her options. It was better to let her know that I would be here for her no matter what, unlike my deadbeat brother. Swiping the back of her hand across her wet cheek, Lexi said,
There are really only two options available to me. I can't and won't have an abortion, so I have to either have the baby and raise it on my own or give it up for adoption.
This was my moment. I could feel it. Summoning all of my strength, I said, "Or you could marry me and we could raise it together." Lexi stared at me for a long time with disbelief, and what I'm desperate to believe was hope in her gaze. Finally, she shook her head.
Don't tell me Tristan talked you into going along with his crazy plan. Why would you do that?
It's not his plan. It's mine. Okay, that was stretching the truth, but I would have come up with this idea if I had thought it was even within the realm of possibility. I wasn't about to let Tristan take credit for it, especially now that it seemed like there was a sliver of a chance it might work out. Lexi's mouth was hanging open.
Why would you be willing to take all of this on?
The camera only gave me a view of her head and shoulders, but she used her hand to point down to her belly anyway. My throat was suddenly parched. I swallowed loudly. This was my chance and I didn't want to blow it. I would give anything to be with you, Lexi, because I love you. There, I had said it. To say Lexi appeared perplexed and stunned would be the understatement of the year.
But You? How? What about?
It was the first time I had ever seen her at a loss for words. She was normally impossibly quick-witted. Saving her from having to formulate a question, I went on. I've loved you since that first time I saw you on the lakeshore, Lexi. Tristan just swooped in and asked you out before I had a chance to do it myself. If he hadn't come along, things might have worked out differently. It was a sentiment I had been feeling for a long time, but it felt strange to express it out loud. I had spent countless hours wondering if Lexi and I would have become a couple if Tristan hadn't been out on the beach that fateful day, or better yet, if he hadn't been born at all. I'm almost positive that she and I would have been inseparable if Tristan hadn't been in the way. He was bailing on her now, so Lexi and I would get to explore our relationship potential.
This isn't right.
Lexi tucked that stubborn lock of golden hair back behind her ear. Feels right to me. I beamed a smile at her, trying to infuse it with confidence. Lexi looked like she was beginning to waver.
Besides, our parents would never allow it. They know I was with Tristan. It's not like we can just announce that you and I are having a baby.
Why not? I asked her logically, raising my shoulders to emphasize the question. Going all in, I added, we could have had a redacted. No one knows for sure. Besides, Tristan and I are identical twins, so the baby will look like me.
I don't know.
Lexi swiped at her nose with a Kleenex.
It feels worse to tell people that I slept with my boyfriend's twin than to admit that my boyfriend knocked me up.
Nodding to acknowledge her concern about what others would think, I admitted, I can see that. But then I added, however, Tristan is leaving you to deal with this all on your own while I am ready to jump in and save the day. It was a cocky statement, but I wanted Lexi to see me as her own personal superhero.
I can't let you do this.
Lexi shook her head.
It's too much and it's not right.
It's not right for who? I'm the one who gets to decide what would be too much, and I say this is just right. I'm in if you are. I stared at the screen, anxiously awaiting her reaction. Rather than answering me, she said,
I can't believe you would do this for your brother. I didn't even think you liked Tristan.
I don't. I told her matter-of-factly before softening my gaze and adding, I'm doing this for you, not him. It's you that I love, and I won't let you struggle to deal with this alone. I'm all in. It was obvious the moment Lexi decided to accept my offer. Her face still looked worried and scared, but the hopelessness had dissipated.
How will I ever be able to thank you enough for doing this?
I beamed what I hoped was a charming smile in her direction. I'm sure you'll think of something. Tristan. It had been ridiculously easy to convince Lexi and Ty to go along with my plan. I had always known I was a master manipulator, but talking my brother into marrying my knocked-up teenage girlfriend while convincing her to let my twin sub in for me really took it to a new level. They were like putty in my hands. Now the three of us just had to convince everyone else. I smiled at my reflection in the mirror. The cuts and bruises Ty's pummeling inflicted were already healing and fading. The injuries had scored me sympathy and a few redacted from the cheerleaders, so it had been well worth the temporary pain. Besides, I couldn't justify escaping from this situation without any consequences. That would make me a villain, and I'm no villain. I'm the hero of our story. Everyone seems to realize that, except for Ty. My relationship with Ty has morphed into one of cautious friendliness. I hate it that he will get to be with Lexi, but I'd rather see them together than give up my future. It irks Ty that I got Lexi pregnant, but he's glad to have the opportunity to be with her. It's strange, but Ty and I are both getting something we want thanks to each other. This predicament seems to have forged a tentative connection between us. None of us were anxious to tell our parents about Lexi's pregnancy, but we knew it had to happen sometime. Sand was dwindling through the hourglass as the days and weeks passed. It wouldn't be long until Lexi's stomach grew enough that people began to ask questions. Wanting to get it over with, I informed Lexi and Ty that we needed to tell our parents. They both reluctantly agreed, and we made a plan for Lexi and her parents to come to our house Sunday afternoon. When Ty and I approached our parents together about Sunday's plans, they gave each other concerned looks. They probably couldn't imagine why the three of us would need to speak to both sets of parents. Seeming to sense that it was important, Dad offered to call Nana Janice and inform her that we wouldn't be attending brunch at her house this Sunday. She didn't take kindly to absences from her weekly family tradition, so we rarely skipped a week. Once the call was made, we were locked into telling our parents the news this weekend, if for no other reason than so we could give Nana Janice a valid excuse for missing her mandatory family brunch. The week seemed to crawl by after that. Now that we had a plan in place, I just wanted to get it over with, so we could all move on with our lives. The waiting was torture. Eventually, Sunday rolled around, and I found myself uncharacteristically nervous. I was the bad guy in this situation, so I wanted to get everything out in the open and begin working to convince everyone to forgive me. The thought of being the less likable twin made me jittery. When the bells arrived, it was obvious by the grim looks on Lexi's parents' faces when Mom swung our front door open to welcome them that Lexi had already dropped the pregnancy bombshell on them. Little did they know, that was only part of the news they would be hearing that day. Deciding to take charge once everyone was seated in our living room, I stood and cleared my throat. I struggled to keep my voice steady as I made the carefully worded announcement that I had been planning for days. Everyone, we have an announcement that might be shocking and disappointing at first, but we hope will eventually be seen as a blessing. One look at my mother's anxious face had me inserting a much shorter dramatic pause than I had intended. Lexi is pregnant. Stunned expressions greeted me. Even Lexi's parents looked shocked by the statement, even though she had obviously already shared this part of it with them. Going rogue and ignoring our planned script, Ty moved to stand beside me and added, "And I'm the father." Tyler. It hadn't been my intention to insert myself into Tristan's big announcement like that, but hearing him sound almost like a proud father grated on my already raw nerves. The words just sort of burst out before I really had a chance to think them through. Once they were out, there was no taking them back, and I found myself glad I had uttered them. Instead of everyone giving me sympathetic glances and thinking about how kind it was of me to clean up my brother's mistake, I would now be the tempting rogue who had a fling with his twin's girlfriend. The optics would be much better for me this way. By the pinched look on Tristan's face, I could tell that he didn't agree with this sudden change in our plans. Although it kept him from looking like an irresponsible cad, it made it seem like his girlfriend cheated on him and chose me over him, at least for a night. For her part, Lexi just looked sad and ashamed. She didn't really seem to care what story we concocted to justify the rest of our plan. She was obviously too distraught to speak, and I didn't want Tristan to take back the narrative, so I quickly went on before he could adjust his game plan. Feeling brave, I flung an arm around Lexi's shoulders. "We know it might seem like a mistake, but we are prepared to face the consequences of our actions. Lexi and I want to be mature adults about this situation, so we are planning to get married and raise this baby together." Silence reigned as I looked one by one at each of the faces around the room. Tristan's was filled with barely contained rage. All four parents looked shell-shocked. Lexi and Sarah had similar distress-filled expressions as tears trailed down their cheeks. My mother was the first to regain her wits.
You're too young to get married.
Absolutely. Lexi's father bobbed his head in agreement, glomming onto my mom's rational reaction. Way too young and irresponsible, he added. I had been expecting their rebuttal, and I was ready for it. There's no denying that we are young and that we acted irresponsibly in this case. But we are mature enough to know what needs to happen. We have already discussed it at length and weighed all of our options. Lexi and I have agreed that the best way to move forward is for us to get married and raise this baby together. My dad finally found his voice. This is preposterous. You're not ready to be a father. Ready or not, I'm going to be one. Turning to give Tristan a twisted smile, I added, and I'm too much of a man to shirk my responsibilities.
What about adoption? We could find a nice, loving family to raise the baby.
Lexi's mother tried.
No.
It was the first word Lexi had spoken. The room silenced as we waited for her to further weigh in.
This baby is mine, and I won't give it away or pretend like it doesn't exist.
She shot a pointed glare in Tristan's direction before wrapping her arm loosely around my waist. We stood there with our arms around each other for a long time before she finally said,
Ty is willing to step up to the plate and take responsibility, so he and I will raise this baby together as a family.
But
her mother started to object. Lexi held up a hand to stop her.
This decision is final. There will be no further discussion about it.
The firm tone of Lexi's voice, despite how it was shaking with emotion, left no doubt that she meant it. I was on top of the world. This was all I had ever wanted. Things might be moving faster than I would have liked, and it wasn't ideal circumstances, but I was getting my girl, and that was all that mattered. If I tried really hard not to acknowledge the tears glistening brightly in her eyes as Lexi pondered our future together, I could almost convince myself that this was real. Tristan. I couldn't believe Ty had the audacity to take credit for getting Lexi pregnant. Granted, it had been a gigantic mistake, but I was the one who had made it, not him. The plan had been for him to swoop in and clean up the mess, not take ownership of it. If my parents knew the truth, Ty would look like a martyr and I would seem like an irresponsible jerk. The way things were, though, it looked like Lexi had cheated on me with Ty. That was so far out of the realm of possibility that I can't even believe they fell for it. Surely no one at school would buy into that ridiculous lie, would they? The sympathetic looks my parents gave me made me want to pummel Ty. No one has ever felt sorry for me before. Ty is the pathetic loser, not me. Somehow this pregnancy has reversed our roles and I can't stand it. My twin was the last person I would ever want to swap lives with. Lexi had ignored me since our big announcement to our families. I really couldn't blame her, but not having her in my life left a gaping hole in my chest. I knew that she and Ty were chatting even more often than before. For some reason it irked me beyond reason. I pictured them giggling and planning their wedding. In reality, I was aware that this situation was being forced on them at much too young of an age, but that knowledge didn't keep my simmering jealousy at bay. Both sets of parents were doing anything in their power to keep the marriage from happening, but Lexi and Ty were determined. Even though it had been my idea, it felt like a speeding freight train that was barreling in the wrong direction. That out-of-control feeling almost made me want to fess up to my role in Lexi's pregnancy and offer to marry her myself, but deep down I knew that archaic philosophy would make me feel trapped. It seemed I was at a horrible impasse where I didn't want Lexi and my baby for myself, but I didn't want Ty to have them either. Despite being aware that it was despicable to feel this way, My emotions seemed to have a mind of their own. Instead of focusing on them, I threw myself even further into the games and girls that dominated my senior year. My plan was to live it up enough for the three of us, since Lexi and Tyler were in no position to party. They had already turned into mini adults, so I morphed into an even bigger rebellious kid. The next time Lexi's family came to our house, it seemed like both sets of parents had come to terms with the fact that Lexi and Ty were determined to get married and raise the baby together. We all sat down to an awkward yet civilized dinner. I hadn't seen Lexi in weeks, and I was startled by how pale and gaunt she looked. Her normally sparkling blue eyes had taken on a faraway glassy stare. Her slightly protruding belly appeared to be the only part of her body that was flourishing. The rest of her was withering away, and the realization that I was the one who had done this to her made me feel physically ill. Unable to stand looking at her because it forced me to acknowledge my role in her downfall, I stared down at my lap. It wasn't just her looks that had been affected. Her entire demeanor was delicate and frail, where once she had been a strong and spirited young lady. For her part, Lexi refused to acknowledge me in any way. It was as if I no longer existed in her world. Latching onto my anger over her ignoring me, I tried to justify in my mind my treatment of her. If she was going to pretend like I didn't even exist, it was definitely a good thing I hadn't chosen to marry her, not that I had ever truly considered it. Wanting to prove to Lexi that her shunning of me wasn't going to slow me down or ruin my future, I made the big announcement I had been saving. I clinked my water glass to get everyone's attention. Once all eyes were on me, including Lexi's blank stare, I cleared my throat and said, "I've made a decision about my future." Guilt washed over me when the unmistakable glimmer of hope flickered in her eyes. Not wanting to mislead her, I quickly went on. "I've decided to accept the football scholarship from the University of Alabama. I'm joining the Crimson Tide." I smiled and lifted my stemmed glass. My chosen college was at the opposite end of the country from Michigan. That should let Ty and Lexi know that I had no intention of standing idly by to watch them raise their happy little family. My parents looked stunned that I planned to move so far away, but they quickly hid their concern with fake smiles. My dad lifted his water glass in my direction and yelled a little too enthusiastically, "Roll Tide." Hears came from around the table. Ty chose that moment to stand. "We have an announcement to make as well." He placed a possessive hand on Lexi's shoulder. I struggled to ignore the proprietorial move. After all, Lexi was going to be his wife. I would have to get used to him touching her. Once I sat down to allow for Ty's big moment, I pinched the bridge of my nose between my thumb and index finger. Ty pinged his glass to let everyone know that his announcement was every bit as important as mine. I struggled not to roll my eyes at his posturing. "Lexi and I have decided to get married immediately after graduation," he announced boldly to stunned gasps around the room.
Why so soon?
Lexi's mom finally found her voice. "There's no reason to wait. We've chosen our path, so we might as well start living it. Besides, everyone will already be gathered for our graduation parties. We might as well make it an even bigger celebration." As an afterthought, he added, "Oh, and Lexi doesn't want to be hugely pregnant in our wedding photos." He gazed down at her with a knowing smile. He kneaded her shoulder in a reassuring and tender gesture. I quickly realized that I might have to accept their growing intimacy, but I didn't want to personally witness it. Moving across the country was likely the smartest decision I had ever made. I needed to get far away from them and never look back. Tyler. My announcement that our nuptials would take place right after graduation set off a flurry of activity. Suddenly, all four of our parents went from states of perpetual sadness and disappointment to being in full planning mode. It was as if our wedding gave them a purpose to focus on, other than how our young lives were going to be ruined. Graduating and getting married on the same day wasn't anything Lexi or I would have ever envisioned for ourselves, but we both believed it was for the best. We didn't want to have the wedding while we were still in high school, but waiting any longer after we got our diplomas seemed silly when we had both made up our minds. Once we decided to get married, neither of us wavered in our conviction. Marrying Lexi was a dream come true for me, so I would never change my mind. The only thing that could possibly change Lexi's mind about marrying me would be if Tristan decided to accept responsibility for the predicament he had put her in. Since he just announced that he was planning to hightail it to Alabama, the possibility of that happening was minuscule. After Lexi and I were married, I would never have to worry about Tristan coming between us again. While it concerned me that she would have chosen him over me if she had that option, I knew that she would grow to love me. Once she realized what it was like to be treated right by a man who loved her with all of his heart, she would never give Tristan another thought. I was sure of it. When my dad approached me to have the financial responsibility talk, I was ready for him. He was pleased to discover I had saved much of the money I had earned from working in his boat barn with him during summers and on weekends. I knew my savings was enough to put down deposits on the small loft apartment Lexi and I had looked at the previous weekend. Dad agreed that my savings should give us a starting point, but the frown his dark brows were forming didn't ease. "What about college? Don't you want to get a degree? What are you going to do for work?" I could tell the unknowns were weighing heavily on him as he tried to figure out how I could still have it all while raising a family. "Well, that's where you come in," I started. I could tell by the shift in his facial expression to one of utter disappointment that he thought I was getting ready to ask him for a loan or for help to get by while I went to school. Instead, I said, "I don't think I need college." Before he could put up a fight, I raised a palm to stop him. School has always been more Tristan's thing than mine. I justified my decision. Besides, I already know what I want to do with my life, and it doesn't require 4 more years of school. I could tell by the way his brows popped up that I had piqued his interest. "Oh, what's that?" "I want to apprentice with you and learn everything you know about boat building, Dad. I've always wanted to work with my hands and create something special that customers can enjoy for years to come, so I might as well learn from the best, right?" Dad's chest visibly swelled with pride. Patrons lined up to get on the 2-year waiting list for one of Dad's boats, but it was the first time I had ever acknowledged that he was the best at what he did. "I suppose that makes sense," he decided. "Maybe one of these days we can become partners in the business." I held my breath as I waited to hear his reaction to my big idea. Patting me roughly on the back in a move he normally reserved for Tristan, Dad said, "That sounds like a fine idea, son." Shifting and seeming suddenly uncomfortable, Dad said, "You know I love you, right?" It wasn't something he said often, so I openly gaped at him. Obviously sensing my surprise, he admitted, "I know I don't say it often enough. That's been a long-term problem of mine." I nodded and beamed at him, letting him off the hook. "I love you too, Dad." Suddenly, my life was falling into place. I was getting ready to marry the girl of my dreams. We had our love nest picked out, and I had the money to put down to secure it for us. I had just landed my dream job. I was about to become a father. Oh, and my brother was moving across the country. Things truly couldn't be any better. Tristan. Nothing could ruin your high school graduation day, like knowing your brother was going to marry your pregnant girlfriend later that day. It sounded ridiculous, even in my own head, but somehow this had become my reality. Graduating from high school was supposed to be a proud achievement. This milestone day was something that I should be able to reflect on with happiness and fond memories. Instead, Ty was ruining it for me. Now, every time I thought of my own high school graduation, I would only remember his wedding to my girl. The only thing that brought me any solace was the knowledge that I was moving on to bigger and better things, while he was stuck here in the life I didn't want. I had college to look forward to. I would be a football star, which would automatically make me a big man on campus. These next 4 years would be filled with glory and wild parties. When I looked back on a graduation, I would focus on my college graduation, while Ty would only have this day. Deciding that my future was the much brighter one, I opted to let him have his moment in the sun. After this momentous day, his life would be filled with crying babies and a nagging wife, while I would be surrounded by redacted co-eds and limitless opportunities. He might win this day, but I am still winning life. With that knowledge, I chose to suck it up and try to be happy for Ty. This was his brief moment in the spotlight. After today, things would be back to normal, and I would be the golden one again. Besides, it wasn't like today was totally about him anyway. I was graduating too, and his wedding was more about Lexi than the groom. Poor Ty was even overshadowed on what should be 2 of the biggest days of his life. He had somehow managed to condense them down to 1 day. Chuckling to myself, I realized that my idiot twin didn't even know how to properly steal the spotlight. Graduation was a blur of hugs, mugging for cameras, and an incredibly long and boring ceremony. The speeches were probably profound, but I couldn't tell you a single nugget of advice they gave us. I was too hyped up to listen. Before long, I was a high school graduate with a bright future ahead of me. I posed for a picture with my brother, who looked like me and also happened to be a high school graduate, but that was where our similarities ended. He was facing a dead-end future, already saddled with a wife and child. I wouldn't trade him places for anything in the world. Actually, I guess I already did swap places with him, smartest decision of my life. Our graduation party awkwardly morphed into wedding preparations. Lexi actually showed up at our lakeside home in her own school's graduation cap and gown, but she was quickly ushered into my parents' bedroom, which had been transformed into a bridal changing area. I had expected Ty and Lexi's wedding ceremony to be difficult to endure. After all, it technically should have been me saying, "I do," rather than my brother. The profound relief that I wasn't the one promising away my future kept it from being too painful, though. There was a long moment when Lexi looked over her groom's shoulder and directly into my eyes. The love I feel for her is real, and I was tempted in that moment to stop the ceremony and offer to marry her myself. I knew that was what she wanted, and for a split second it was what I wanted too. We would have been happy for a while if I had stepped in to take my rightful place as her groom and the father of her child. I knew myself too well, though, to believe that I would be satisfied with a simple life while working a dead-end job to support my teenage bride and our unborn child. It wouldn't be long until I was craving more and resenting Lexi for trapping me here and limiting my options. Ty was the one who could be satisfied with that life, not me. He had never dreamed of anything bigger than following our dad into the boat building business. My brother didn't have any higher aspirations, so to him marrying Lexi was a dream come true. I tried to give Lexi a reassuring smile over Ty's shoulder. We had been dealt a difficult hand, but this was the best resolution for all of us. I felt sure of it. Tears pooled in her eyelids, making me almost waver again. If I thought I could be a better husband to her in the long run than Ty would, I would have stepped in. I loved Lexi enough to be tempted to give up everything for her. I knew, though, that Ty was the better choice for her and our baby. Reminding myself that this was what was best for them, I stood silently by and watched my identical twin marry the girl I loved. As they sealed their commitment with a kiss, I realized that Ty was now officially the father of my unborn child. There was no turning back from our decisions now. We had all sealed our futures. Ignoring the gnawing ache deep in the pit of my stomach, I tried to focus solely on my relief at not having to pay the consequences for my actions. Ty owed that debt now. For his part, my brother didn't appear smart enough to realize he had just signed on for a lifetime of misery, monotony, and monogamy. I should have been grateful to him for taking on that burden, but when he beamed at the small crowd after the preacher announced Mr. and Mrs. Tyler Davis, I wanted nothing more than to punch him in the jaw. Tyler. I'm no idiot, although my brother obviously thinks I am. I am well aware that Lexi would have much preferred to marry Tristan, rather than me. I know she's in love with him, but I also know that I love her more than he does. Once she sees what it's like to be someone's top priority, she'll never look back. Lexi practically glowed with effortless beauty when she walked down the makeshift aisle in our front yard towards me. She was absolutely flawless, other than her somewhat sad expression that she struggled valiantly to hide. Even though our wedding had been quickly thrown together so Lexi's pregnancy wouldn't be the sole topic of conversation, it couldn't have been more picturesque. The early evening breeze blew in off the lake and fluttered her golden hair back from her face, making her look like a supermodel. The key people in our lives were all in attendance, and the lakeshore where we had first met made the perfect backdrop for our vows. It wasn't lost on me when Lexi made eye contact with Tristan over my shoulder. Although I despised the longing look she gave him, I knew he was too selfish to ever step into my shoes. She stared at him for a long moment, almost as if she was willing him to do right by her. I had no doubt that he would stand silently by and watch me marry the woman he had knocked up. In his mind, I was saving him from a lifetime of misery, but I knew that in actuality, I had just scored the life of my dreams. I stared at Lexi, longing for her to turn her brilliant blue gaze back in my direction. She seemed mesmerized by the man just behind me. Feeling another set of eyes on me, I glanced over Lexi's shoulder and noticed Sarah's piercing gaze locked onto me, silently begging me not to go through with this. Ignoring my bride's kid sister, I quickly brought my attention back to Lexi. Eventually, my beautiful bride tore her gaze away from my stubborn, selfish brother, evidently giving up on changing his mind. I took her dainty hand within mine, hoping to reassure her that I would be there for her from now on. I said my vows out loud and I meant every word. Silently, I added that I would be there to pick up the pieces when Lexi finally admitted to herself that Tristan was not the man for her. I knew that it would take some time, but I would make her see that I was the one who deserved her love, not him. Our small reception went by in a blur of congratulations and well wishes. I'm sure everyone in attendance thought we were too young to make such a life-altering decision, but most of our family members managed to hide their concerns behind brittle smiles. My grandfather was the exception to this rule of politeness. Sutton Davis was not one to stand silently by while someone in his family did something he didn't agree with.
"What the heck are you thinking, boy?"
He asked me right in front of my new bride.
"I can make a few calls and have this fiasco annulled by morning."
He offered as if it was a great gift. "I don't want my marriage annulled, grandfather," I said boldly. It was the first time in my life that I had done more than give a one-word response or nod in answer to his booming baritone voice.
"You'll change your mind soon,"
he predicted confidently. Deciding that now was as good of a time as any, I jumped in with both feet. "I won't," I told him firmly before clinking my champagne flute with one of the tines on my fork. Once I had everyone's attention, I thanked them all for coming, said that this was the happiest day of my life, and put my arm around Lexi as I announced that we were going to have a baby. Although it couldn't have been much of a surprise to anyone in attendance, considering the timing of our quickie wedding, right after our graduation ceremonies, several people still gasped in shock at my bold declaration. My Aunt Jessie leaned over to her husband Uncle Joe and stage whispered, "I told you she was pregnant." Since it was loud enough for all of us to hear, the comment earned her an exasperated eye roll from her daughter, Katie. Ignoring their family drama, I went on as if nothing had happened. "We are thrilled to be starting the next generation of the Davis family." Tristan narrowed his eyes in my direction, but didn't come forward to stake his claim. I knew it had always irked him that he wasn't the firstborn of our generation. He had been born minutes before me, making him the firstborn heir on our little fork of the family tree, but he wasn't the titan of our generation that I knew he would prefer to be. Our cousins had beaten him to that entitlement. Now his child would be claiming the top spot in the next generation of Davises, but to the world, this was now my child. He could have as many kids as he wanted down the line, but none would be the firstborn of its generation. That privilege belonged to my unborn child that Lexi was carrying. I gave my brother a knowing smile as I lifted my sparkling champagne flute into the air and possessively placed my other palm on Lexi's tummy. To the heir apparent. Grandfather's eyes locked with mine as everyone lifted the glasses to toast. It was the first time Sutton Davis had ever looked at me like he truly saw me. After a long stare, he gave me a brisk nod of approval. Lifting my chin, I realized that I had just earned the redacted's respect. Searching the tiny crowd of friends and family, I looked for my brother. My intent had been to give him a smug smile, but he was already making his way out to our driveway, obviously intent on leaving. I guess he couldn't stand seeing me win. I had no idea what to expect on our wedding night. Lexi still loved my brother. I knew that. But I had also just promised my entire future to her to help her raise a child that wasn't mine. That had to make her feelings for me grow, right? When we arrived in front of the loft apartment I had used a big chunk of my savings to rent, the nerves began to kick in. Seeing Tristan run away from our wedding reception because for once I was the one who had it all, left me feeling on top of the world. Getting to go to a cozy apartment alone with Lexi was positively surreal. I was sure I had stolen someone else's marvelous life. I guess I had technically stolen Tristan's life, but it was the version of his life that he didn't want. I did want it though. I wanted it more than anything, and I couldn't believe it was now mine. Wanting Lexi to experience everything she had missed by our lack of courtship and quickie wedding, I swooped her off her feet to carry her over the threshold of our new apartment.
What are you doing?
She squealed near my ear, swatting playfully at my shoulder.
I probably weigh a ton with all of this extra baby weight.
You're light as a feather, I told her honestly, thinking to myself that her small belly pooch from the baby probably didn't add 5 pounds to her thin frame. The stress of the past couple of months had taken a physical toll on her, but I planned to cook her so much delicious food that she would have to gain weight and keep our baby healthy. Wanting to begin laying the groundwork for that, I added, I can't wait to see you with a few extra pounds. It will give me more of you to love. With that, I gave her a tentative kiss on the cheek. It was the first time my lips had touched her, outside of my imagination and our chaste kiss at the wedding ceremony, and they instantly craved more. I didn't want to scare her off, but every inch of my body was tingling with the thrill of being this near the woman of my dreams. It hadn't yet fully sunk into my thick skull that she was my wife and that we would be together forever. My sudden good fortune was astounding.
That's all you need is to be saddled with a big fatso for a wife.
Lexi rolled her eyes at me. I had been afraid that she might be concerned about her weight. She had been perfect in every way for her entire life, so it was bound to be worrying her. Desperate to set her nerves at ease, I placed her gently back on her feet and said, I don't care how much you weigh. You will always be my gorgeous wife.
Really?
She asked me, seeming intrigued by my answer. Wanting her to sense my sincerity, I looked deeply into her lake blue eyes. Really, I promised, tucking the misbehaving golden curl behind her ear. You're beautiful and your body is absolute perfection, but I love you. Not your looks. I pressed my hand over her heart to accentuate my words. My palms were damp as I waited for her reaction to my declaration of love. I wasn't delusional enough to expect her to proclaim her love for me in return. I knew she still loved Tristan, but I planned to chip away at her heart until she made room for me in it. Eventually, I would shove Tristan right out and claim a solo residency in there.
Wow.
Lexi finally responded as her long eyelashes fluttered. I could tell that my blatant honesty was making her uncomfortable. Are you hungry? I asked her, thinking that I could offer to order takeout since the kitchen wasn't fully stocked yet. No. She shook her head before adding,
I'm still too jittery to eat.
At my concerned look, she added,
Today was a big day.
That it was, I readily agreed, beaming a big smile at her. Looking around our tiny living room and suddenly feeling awkward, I asked, Do you want to watch a movie or something?
No. I'm actually kind of tired.
She admitted, and it dawned on me that I should have realized that. Going through the stress of her high school graduation and wedding day while pregnant must have been incredibly draining. Me too, I quickly agreed, not wanting her to feel like she needed to stay up for me. We can go to bed, I offered. We both stared awkwardly at the ground. This was the moment of truth. We hadn't explicitly discussed the sleeping arrangements for our new apartment. I would gallantly offer to sleep on the couch if she wanted me to, but I didn't really want to start out our marriage that way. Although I suspected it would take her some time to warm to having me in her bed, being there was my ultimate goal. Just as I started to say I would sleep out in the living room, she reached out her hand for mine and said,
Yes, let's go to bed.
If I live 1,000 years, I doubt I'll ever hear sweeter words than those. When we reached our small bedroom that I had furnished with the bare essentials, Lexi turned her back towards me and lifted her golden halo of hair out of the way.
Will you unzip me?
My throat felt parched. When I swallowed, it seemed to echo around the room. Gladly. My voice sounded croaky, even though I was doing my best to seem cool and relaxed. In 2 long strides, I was standing directly behind her. Her white gown was simple and elegant. It shimmered with intricate beadwork. Clearing my throat, I said, I meant to tell you earlier how lovely your dress is.
It was the best we could do on such short notice.
Her voice didn't reveal any of the same jittery nerves mine did. Thinking that I couldn't have imagined anything more lovely, I said aloud, "It's perfect." Wanting to seem smooth, I slowly lowered the zipper before leaning down to kiss the back of her neck. Whispering near her ear, I added, "You're perfect." Her spine stiffened under my light touch, but I couldn't tell if she was surprised by how good it felt or if it made her skin crawl. Determined to take things slow and let her grow to care for me before we took our relationship to a physical level, I walked back to what had quickly been decided was my side of the room. Shucking my jacket and tie, it dawned on me how big decisions like that could be made in a mere moment. From now on, this would be my side of the room and bed. I sat on the side of the bed to remove my uncomfortable shiny dress shoes. That's when I heard the whish of silky fabric hitting the floor. My intent had been to tell Lexi that we could remain friends for as long as she needed, but as I slowly turned my head to face her, I knew that gallant plan had just been tossed out the window. Lexi was standing before me in just her redacted. She looked so pure with her tan skin contrasting against the snowy white wisps of fabric. Everything was in slow motion as she stepped out of the gown, where it had pooled on the floor. That's when I noticed that she was still wearing her heels. A team of wild horses couldn't have kept me from going to her then. I stood before her feeling stunned, unworthy, and like the luckiest man in the world. How my idiotic brother had managed to have and lose this woman was something I would never understand. I had already taken a vow in front of our friends and family to stay with her, loving her until the end of our days, but in that moment, I couldn't imagine taking another breath without her by my side.
You saved me.
Lexi's eyelids lowered as if they were too heavy to keep open. Needing to touch her, I reached out to place my hand on her flushed cheek. She turned her head to the side and pressed her lips into my palm. My skin practically sizzled where she kissed me. With that impossibly tender, sweet kiss, I realized that Lexi intended to let me redacted her tonight. Giddiness practically overwhelmed me as all of my blood rushed downward. As much as my redacted was ready, willing, and able to redacted, I refused to take Lexi like redacted, like I'd overheard Tristan do. Our wedding night was one of the most momentous events of our lives, and I intended for both of us to remember this forever. I was determined to hold back until Lexi was redacted and begging me for more. My plan was to caress, cuddle, tease, and redacted every inch of her until she was redacted. Even once I redacted, I would redacted tenderly to show her what she had been missing up until now. After I spent the entire night showing her how a real man redacted to a woman, she wouldn't even remember Tristan's name. When she reached for redacted, I clamped my hand around her wrist to slow her. She was obviously used to being rushed, and I intended to let her know that we didn't need to be in any hurry. Tonight would be all about her, and I wouldn't stop bringing her redacted until she begged me for redacted. I would make Lexi mine tonight, and after that she wouldn't want to be with anyone else, especially not my selfish brother. It took every ounce of willpower I could muster to hold back, but I knew the end reward would be even sweeter for us both if we took our time with the build-up and foreplay. The anticipation of being with Lexi was all-consuming. I couldn't imagine how delectable actually redacted would feel. Chances were high that it would leave me utterly senseless, but that was a risk I was more than willing to take. Resting my hand on the slight swell of her tummy, I infused my voice with sincerity as I promised, "I'll take care of you and our baby for the rest of our days. You never have to worry about being alone. I'll never leave you." I wanted to make sure she knew that she could count on me, unlike my selfish twin. When I noticed her eyes glistening, I told myself that her unshed tears were ones of gratitude and happiness, not sadness over what could have been with Tristan. One of the tears escaped and traveled down her soft cheek. I leaned down and pressed my lips to it, stopping the liquid in its tracks with my kiss. Knowing that her emotions must be on a wild roller coaster ride, I made the offer that my heart knew is right, even if other parts of my body vehemently disagreed. "We don't have to do anything tonight," I whispered near her ear. My redacted was desperate to redacted, but I forced it to stand down as she pondered my words. It seemed like an eternity as she thought it over, but in actuality it was probably only a few seconds. The rational side of me knew that it would be better to wait and let Lexi come to me in her own time. It wouldn't be right to rush her into redacted just because we were married. Besides, I would have a lifetime to enjoy redacted once she realized that I was the brother she should have chosen in the first place. I knew deep within my heart that I was the one who could and would make her happy. Forcing myself to take a step back from her in a gesture that mimicked my words, I said, "I can sleep on the couch." It was the hardest retreat I had ever made, but I knew that rushing Lexi into redacted wouldn't be the wisest move in the long run. Sleeping with her while she still had feelings for Tristan would only confuse her more. I would redacted her once her anger and crushed feelings culminated into a near hatred for my brother. Since I was turning towards the living room, I barely heard her words. The pounding in my head at her insinuation as I turned to face her made me feel like I might pass out. My questioning gaze must have let her know that I needed confirmation because she repeated her one-word request.
"Stay."
My efforts to be a nice guy sailed out the window with that simple invitation. In 2 large strides I was back in front of her. My redacted trying to redact it and reach the girl of my dreams, my wife. Losing control for a second, I wrapped her in my arms and crushed my lips to hers. My best intentions not to be redacted with her evaporated as my tongue delved into her mouth. She tasted so good. I didn't think I would ever get enough of kissing her. My hands clasped either side of her face as I devoured her. Delving one of my hands into her long, soft hair, I redacted. Kissing Lexi was everything I had dreamed it would be, and so much more. She tasted better than the most delectable dessert on earth, and I almost couldn't believe she was mine. This time when she went for my redacted, I didn't have the strength to slow her. She made quick work of redacted. I scrambled to unbutton my dress shirt and tossed it aside. In one smooth maneuver, Lexi grabbed redacted. I redacted. She didn't bother to look down. It dawned on me then that she had seen my identical twin brother redacted numerous times, so she didn't have to wonder what delightful surprises my body had in store for her. Shoving that thought out of my mind, I moved closer to her. The redacted seeking skin-on-skin contact. When Lexi reached down and tentatively ran a hand redacted, I tipped my head back and redacted with the delicious pleasure of it. Her touch was like nothing I had ever experienced before, and I wanted to feel it every day for the rest of my life. Knowing that if she kept touching me like that I would redacted, I pulled her into an embrace. She let go of redacted and wrapped her arms around me. Craving more of her skin on me, I redacted in what I hoped was a smooth maneuver. She redacted as we stood there hugging. Her skin was silky soft and warm. As much as I was dying to get a look at her redacted, I couldn't stand to pull back and have her stop touching me. My hands roved down her smooth back under redacted. I pulled her into me and savored the feeling of our full-body hug. Lexi was the one who broke our redacted. She stepped back, leaned down to remove each of her heels, slowly lowered redacted, kicked them aside with her big toe and sat down on the bed. I watched her every move, mesmerized. Her redacted were beyond glorious. I couldn't take my eyes off them. The only thing that could have broken my concentration from them was the delightful secrets that taunted me from further down her body. Just when I didn't think it was possible for my redacted, Lexi redacted and said,
"Come here."
I thought I was going to redact it on the spot. She was even hotter than my wildest imagination, and she was summoning me to her. In a flash, I joined her on the bed. As desperate as I was to redacted, I forced myself to hold back. I wanted to make sure she was redacted. My number one goal was to make sure Lexi enjoyed this as much as, if not more than, I did. She tried to redacted. It took every bit of my strength, but I refrained. Instead, I redacted. They were absolute perfection. I redacted them both, not quite able to believe my good fortune. As I redacted, cherishing her, my hand redacted. She was warm and soft. I was delighted to discover that she was redacted. When I redacted, all I could picture was redacted, but I forced myself to hold back. I needed to make sure to take this slow. My number one goal was to bring Lexi to redacted. My own redacted was guaranteed. I was practically there just from redacted. When she said,
"I'm ready,"
my restraint was tested to its limits. My plan had been to have her redacted. She wasn't quite there yet. Deciding that having me redacted while I redacted, I gave in. I leaned over to retrieve the unopened condom box from the drawer in the single bedside table.
"I'm already pregnant,"
Lexi quipped when she realized what I was doing. I froze before pulling back to stare at her. She went on as if she needed to convince me.
"I've only been with Tristan and he's only been with me, so you don't have to worry about getting any diseases."
I knew that her belief in Tristan's fidelity was unfounded, but no redacted could have scared me out of redacted with no barriers between us. Feeling like I needed to reassure her about my status, I said, "I always wear condoms so I don't have anything." I didn't mention that my redacted experience was rather limited anyway. She nodded briskly as if it hadn't really crossed her mind that I might have been with anyone else, even though she had seen me getting a redacted from her sister. I rolled redacted. She redacted for me. Redacted. The anticipation of it coursed through my veins as I redacted, yet wanting to draw out this moment that I had dreamed of for so long. My body was redacted. I closed my mouth over hers and redacted. Never in my life had I experienced anything so marvelous. This had to be what heaven felt like. She was divine perfection as I redacted. She was redacted as if we were made for each other. Reluctantly, I redacted, so that I could redact it again. Breaking our kiss so that I could lean up and look into her eyes as I redacted, I gazed down at her with redacted coursing through my veins. That's when I saw the tear. She turned her head to the side in a futile attempt to keep me from noticing it, but I watched the single drop of water blazing a trail down her cheek. Despite the glorious chills racing through my body over finally being with the woman of my dreams, I redacted and sat up. Praying I had misinterpreted what I had seen, I turned back to look at her. More tears were flowing down her cheeks now. She whispered the words,
"I'm sorry."
Needing to make her see that I could make her happy, I offered, "We can take things slower. I know that if you give me a chance you'll grow to love me." She nodded slowly, but her glassy faraway stare let me know that she didn't believe there was any way that would ever happen. Feeling desperate, I ran my hand through my hair. I didn't want to admit even to myself what I was about to say out loud, but I was willing to do anything for Lexi. Looking down at my bare feet as they swirled over the carpet, I mumbled, I look like him and sound like him. Thinking of our identical anatomy, I added, I'm built like him. Lexi sobbed quietly. My brother couldn't have intruded more into our marital bed without physically being there between us. I couldn't believe the mere memory of Tristan was redacted me from my bride. Swallowing my last bit of pride, I turned to her and added, You can teach me to redact you the way he does. Please, I'll do anything to make you happy. The shake of her head was almost imperceptible. Grasping at a tiny last bit of hope, I pleaded with her. Just try to love me like you love him. I know we can make this work.
I wish I could. I would give anything to make my stupid heart love you and forget about Tristan.
She pulled her knees up to her chest and wrapped her arms around them. Her voice was so quiet I could barely make out her words when she said,
I'm sorry, but it's just not the same and it never will be.
The look she gave me was brimming with a mixture of pity and disgust. I hated that look, and I despised having to beg for Tristan's leftover scraps. I loved Lexi with all of my heart, but it was finally dawning on me that she would never feel the same way about me, no matter how sweet or loving I was to her. In a last-ditch effort to sway her, I asked, Can't you use your imagination and pretend that I'm him? The look she gave me was filled with revulsion. I couldn't stand the way she was glaring at me. Shame overwhelmed me for having asked her to redact with me by picturing my twin. Before long, my shame morphed into anger. I got up and slammed out of the room. Furious with the entire world, I shouted the only word that seemed fitting at the moment up towards the ceiling. Redacted? Dirk, 8 years later. Looking down at my hideous orange one-piece jumpsuit, I smiled. After today, I would never wear anything this awful color ever again. It didn't suit me. Actually, it didn't really suit anyone. Today was my release day, and I couldn't wait to go visit my stuffy holier-than-thou family. What would my overbearing father think about his fresh-out-of-prison prodigal son's surprise return? My guess was that he and his hoity-toity family would be less than pleased. I couldn't wait to see their stunned faces glaring in shock over my arrival. My plan was simple. I'd had plenty of downtime on the inside to work out all of the details. I would swoop in, inform them of their impending downfall, and walk out like a boss. None of them would take me seriously, of course, and that was exactly why I would win. People, especially my own family, had a bad habit of underestimating me, but I knew what I wanted, and I was willing to do whatever was necessary to get it. The monotony of my days during my stint in prison had allowed me the time to hone in with laser focus on precisely what needed to happen for my dreams to become a reality. The Davises were going to pay dearly for treating me as an inferior over the years. They were about to realize that Dirk Davis was a winner, which meant they all had to lose. Tristan. I downed another drink in 2 gulps. It burned down my throat and helped numb the pain. I thrummed my fingers on the shiny maple bar to get the attractive bartender's attention for a refill, but she ignored me. There was once a time when no pretty girl had the strength or desire to ignore me, but those days were long gone. Once my injured knee knocked me off the professional track for football or any other sport, my life took a sharp downward turn. My parents offered to pay for the rest of my college education when I lost my football scholarship, but I couldn't drum up the energy to go to my classes. I was no longer the sought-after star of the football team. Now I was just another average loser. This must be what Ty had felt like in high school, absolutely dreadful. Without cute groupie co-eds to help me with my papers and homework, my grades plummeted. Before long, I was tossed out on my butt without a degree, viable skills, or a job. My options were limited, so I ended up moving back to Michigan to live near my parents' house. I hid out in my tiny apartment, went to my crappy construction job, and did my best not to see anyone from high school, lest they witness firsthand my massive downfall. I no longer even had my family to fall back on. The last person I wanted to see was my successful brother. It was like our roles had reversed after high school. Ty was now the winner, which left me as the loser. The shift must have made him uncomfortable too, because he avoided me like the plague. It was like he didn't want to see me and be reminded of how awful life could be, so we ended up splitting up the holidays with our parents like divorced couples did with their children. Our parents couldn't stand to see the rift between us, but none of their efforts to mend our broken relationship would ever work. Ty and I were too estranged to ever be brothers again. We were absolute strangers to each other now, and that is precisely how we both wanted it. I was too lost in my own thoughts to notice that the bartender was standing directly in front of me. When I finally looked at her, she raised a perfectly shaped brow in my direction. Just as I was getting ready to tell her I needed another drink, she said,
You don't even recognize me, do you?
Since my fall from grace, I had stopped looking closely at women. The vast majority of them looked straight through me as if they were searching for something better just over my shoulder. Rather than facing that harsh reality, I generally gazed right past them too, other than taking note of whether they had redacted. The bartender tapped one of her shiny hot pink fingernails on the glossy surface of the bar as she waited for me to respond. Suddenly, there wasn't enough air in the room. I studied her face and wondered if she was a cheerleader I had redacted in high school. If she was, I didn't want her to see me like this. The only thing I had left was my former reputation, and my current self would obliterate that.
Wow, I can't believe you.
She bugged her eyes out at me before tipping her head back with a deep, sexy laugh. Something about that laugh was familiar. Studying her further, I almost couldn't believe my eyes. Sarah? My voice sounded stunned. You're all grown up.
That I am.
She grinned as she leaned over the bar. I gawked at the stunning view of her redacted, not quite able to believe Lexi's wallflower kid sister had turned into this curvy stunner. It's been a while, but the years have been good to you. I gave her my best charming grin, even as I wondered if I had bothered to brush the fuzz off my teeth that morning. It hadn't seemed like a priority at the time, but now I wished I had taken more care with my looks and hygiene. Giving me a sad smile but keeping the kindness in her eyes, she replied,
Wish I could say the same for you. It looks like the past few years have taken their toll on you.
And there it was. She felt sorry for me. Within minutes of seeing me again, she had figured out that I was no longer the winner I used to be. Giving up on charming her, I lifted my glass. I could use another. Her eyes narrowed with judgment, but she poured me another drink, which I pounded down. I couldn't stand the way she was looking at me, like she could see directly through to my dark, shattered soul. Since she didn't appear to be willing to walk away, I asked the question that was burning in my throat, aching to get out, even though I knew I probably wouldn't like the answer. So, how's your sister? I tried but failed to keep my voice casual.
She's perfectly fine.
Sarah tossed back, lifting her chin as if challenging me to question the validity of her answer. That's good, I said, honestly hoping that Lexi's divorce from Ty hadn't ruined her life. The only details I knew about their situation came from the awkward tidbits my parents shared with me when they let their guards down for a moment. I was desperate for Sarah to elaborate on Lexi's well-being, but she didn't seem inclined to, and I knew I had no right to pry. When Sarah went to retrieve a chilled bottle of beer for another patron, my knee jiggled up and down. My nervous energy escalated into impatience when she tipped her head back with another of her throaty laughs. Rather than flirting her way to generous tips, I wanted her to give me the scoop on her sister. I longed for details about Lexi. Even though I had managed to ruin my chances with her by forcing her into my brother's arms, my feelings for her hadn't dissipated in the slightest. In fact, if anything, they had grown over the years as I realized what an enormous, unforgivable mistake I had made. At the time, I hadn't realized how special our young love truly was. In all the years since, I have never been able to even come close to replicating it. When Sarah finally returned to her spot across from me, I gave up my cool facade. Not caring if my desperation showed, I prompted her. Is she happy?
Yeah, I guess.
Sarah responded vaguely. Evidently sensing my morbid curiosity about my ex, she finally added.
After they lost the baby, Lexi and Ty couldn't keep up their ruse anymore.
Her words were like a sucker punch to my gut. I had known, of course, that the baby was stillborn. I had yearned for a way to comfort Lexi about the loss, but every time I picked up the phone I set it back down without calling. I had no idea what to say to make her feel better. I knew that she wouldn't welcome my condolences over the loss of our son. It was an incredibly messed up situation, and there was no denying that much of it was my fault. Seeming to sense my sincere guilt, Sarah revealed.
Honestly, I don't think Lexi has ever been able to fully move on from the loss of baby Tate, or you.
Hearing our baby's name spoken aloud made my stomach tighten. I hated the thought of Lexi being in pain. Even more, I hated the fact that I hadn't been there to provide some comfort to her through that pain after the stillbirth. As Tate's father, I should have been there by her side throughout that ordeal. Instead, I had shunned my responsibilities and let Ty marry the only woman I had ever truly loved. The two of them had every right to hate me. I normally didn't let myself think about it, so remembering my role in the horrific situation made me feel physically ill. My complexion must have turned the same putrid shade of green as I felt because Sarah asked,
Hey, are you okay?
Never better, I lied. My phone buzzed with an incoming text. I had a vague, unsettled feeling that it was bad news. Taking a deep breath, I decided that it wasn't possible for my situation to get much worse. Turns out I was wrong. When I flipped my phone over to look at the message, my life instantly took a nosedive further down the toilet. Dirk. I stared at the texted words on my phone screen for a long time before tossing it down beside me on the sidewalk. Redacted. I shouted to the sky. This wasn't at all how things were supposed to work out. The old man wasn't supposed to die before I had the chance to take my revenge for how he has treated me my entire life. Tristan Davis always seemed invincible. His tall, commanding presence, booming voice, and swirl of snowy white hair combined to make him seem like a formidable powerhouse. I couldn't believe he was gone. It simply couldn't be possible. Death was too weak for Tristan Davis. He wouldn't allow it. He was the type of being who gave off the impression that he would somehow outlive all of his offspring. The thought of his demise was absolutely inconceivable. But evidently he had succumbed, and now I would never get the chance to prove to him that I was worthy of his admiration, his love, his fear, or his fortune. He would never accept me as his son or cry out that I defeated him. I missed my chance. My father had always considered me to be his biggest failure, and I will never be able to prove otherwise. Redacted.
What are you doing out here in the rain?
The woman used the toe of her black boot to lightly shove against my leg. She looked vaguely familiar, but my mind couldn't quite place her, and I didn't have the energy to figure it out. Although I ignored her for a long time, she continued to stand there, obviously expecting an answer to her question. Finally, I said, "Just sitting." Not taking the hint that I wasn't in the mood to chat, she took off her bright yellow plastic rain jacket, smoothed it out on the ground, and plopped her butt down on top of it right beside me. After digging around in her voluminous purse for a bit, her hand emerged with a travel-sized umbrella. She popped the umbrella open and scooted closer to me. She held it so that it covered both of our heads from the misting rain.
Just sitting, huh? Right outside the gates of the mansion?
She tried again to start a conversation. She was pretty, even though her black hair was puffed up with frizz from the damp humidity. There was once a time when I would have looked at her as a challenge to get redacted. I had quickly learned after my release, though, that my time in prison had given me a hard, angry look that made nice girls shy away. She looked too soft and innocent for me. I would only bring her trouble. I needed to find a woman who liked a little bit of danger. Determined to shut her down, I merely nodded in response. We sat in silence for a while. Eventually, the woman said quietly,
"You must be so upset about your father."
I turned to get a better look at her then. She was even prettier than I had first realized. Her chocolate eyes sparkled with the knowledge that she had the upper hand. Deciding not to play any games, I asked her point blank, "Do I know you?" She tipped her head back and laughed. It was a trilling redacted sound that had me redacted and rethinking my snap decision to leave her alone. Her mouth was wide and her lips were full, perfect for. I forced myself to stop that thought in its tracks lest I get her redacted and frighten her away. My months of abstinence in prison were taking a toll on my level of restraint, despite my best intentions. Once her laughter subsided, those delicious brown eyes bored into me, seeming like they could see directly into my soul.
You should. My mom has worked for your father for, I don't know, our entire lives.
The wheels turned in my brain as I stared at her. The beautiful vision I was looking at didn't align with my memories of the gawky, gangly dork she had been the last time I saw her. Violet. My voice sounded as perplexed as I felt.
He does recognize the help.
She teased me. Her broad smile revealed gleaming straight white teeth where metal braces had previously been. "You're hardly the help," I smiled down at her. Her mother, Elena's official title might have been head housekeeper at the Davis Manor, but she meant so much more to them than that. Elena and her daughter had been accepted as part of their family for decades. Violet had grown up alongside the other grandkids, the chosen ones anyway. I had only been around her when I was carted in for parties and special celebrations from the shanty town where I grew up. I grinned to myself as I realized calling the fancy suburb where I had lived a shanty town was a complete fabrication. My childhood home would have been considered opulent by most, but when compared with the Davis estate, it had seemed like a rundown shack. Putting a hand over her heart in mock distress, Violet teased,
"I'm the offspring of the help, that's even worse."
"It's still not as bad as being the redacted born to the family patriarch when he was way too old to be out redacted," I quipped back to her, making light of the dark cloud that perpetually hung over me.
"You."
Violet reacted to the mental image of my distinguished larger-than-life father doing redacted. "I know, right? Saggy redacted." I watched her cringe and chuckled for the first time in longer than I could remember. Enjoying her reaction, I added, "Redacted."
"Stop. Please stop."
Violet begged even as she giggled.
"I don't want to visualize any of that."
"Me neither," I smiled before turning serious. "I can't believe he's really gone. He seemed too mean to die."
"Everyone dies."
Violet reminded me. Nodding, I responded, "I know, but it just seems somehow beneath him."
"I get what you mean."
Violet agreed, having experienced Sutton's commanding presence firsthand.
"He was the kind of man that seemed invincible."
Deep inside, I knew that he wasn't, but I can't believe he went and died before I had the chance to take him down. I guess he still won even in death. The rain was barely coming down at all now in a super fine mist, but Violet continued to hold the umbrella over our heads. She pondered my words for a long moment before asking,
"Take him down?"
I nodded, lost in my own thoughts. Sensing that she wanted more of an explanation, I added simply, "For always underestimating me and treating me like an unwanted, unloved stepchild."
"That's what you thought?"
Violet's eyes were wide open as she gazed at me. At my nod, she shook her head.
"I always thought you were the one that he was secretly the most proud of. You managed to prosper without the same level of privileges his other offspring enjoyed. When you weren't looking, he looked at you like you were the special one. I guess it's all about perspective."
"What? No." I bugged my eyes out at her like she was crazy, because she must be, if she truly believed my father in any way favored me. Shrugging her shoulders, Violet opted not to fight with me about it. I was unwilling to back down from this since I had chosen to make plotting revenge my life's mission while I was incarcerated. All of the Davises looked down on me. They think they're better than me, but I had a plan to show them the truth. I was going to steal my father's business away from him, and I would have enjoyed doing it. But now it's all ruined because he went and died. For the first time, those gorgeous doe eyes were cautious as they gazed up at me. Deciding that was probably for the best, I went all in with the crazy act. I would have much preferred being able to kill him myself with my bare hands. That was all it took. Violet bolted up and scurried away from me. I made sure my maniacal laugh echoed down the street after her. It wasn't until she was far out of earshot that my hysterical laughter turned to dry, heaving sobs. Tyler. I sat on a stool at my granite kitchen countertop, staring off into space. It didn't surprise me at all to realize that Lexi's sister, Sarah, was the only person I wanted to talk to about my grandfather's sudden passing. Since my divorce from Lexi, I had thrown myself into my work. I had created a successful offshoot of my father's business by building one-of-a-kind handcrafted canoes and sanding them until they gleamed. Working on those sought-after boats was the only thing that had kept me sane during those long, lonely years. My thriving business brought me an almost unfathomable degree of financial success. I had everything that money could buy, but that was where my fortune ended. After losing Tate, Lexi and I had mutually agreed that our marriage was a sham that should not be continued. Our divorce hurt, even though it had become obvious during the months that we were married that Lexi would never grow to love me. She was completely smitten with Tristan and blinded by her unwavering love for him. Although he had done wrong by her, she couldn't seem to let him go. Nothing I could say or do would ever change that. Once I finally realized that, letting Lexi go had been the only viable option. After a string of one-night stands and meaningless encounters in an attempt to fill the void, I came to the realization that I wasn't meant to find true love. No one had been more surprised than me when Lexi's sister Sarah had shown up at my door last year. At first I had merely sought physical comfort in her arms. It didn't take long, though, to realize that our relationship was destined for so much more than just phenomenal. Redacted. Sarah had been silently standing by since we were teens, waiting for me to notice her behind her sister's shadow. Once I did, I couldn't believe it had taken me so long to truly see her. She had matured into a beautiful, funny, smart, and redacted woman. She deserved to be out in the sunlight, rather than peeking out from behind Lexi. Enjoying the physical delights of being with a woman who craved me as much as I wanted her was earth-shattering. I had never dreamed that my life could be so good. The realization that Sarah was the one I was meant to be with all along hit me like a freight train. I couldn't quite believe that I had been so blinded by my one-sided feelings for her sister. I apologized profusely to Sarah that it had taken me so long to wake up and truly see her. Although I didn't deserve her easy forgiveness, she gave it willingly. I don't know what I did to win such a wonderful woman's heart, but I planned to do anything in my power to keep her. One of these days I would need to share with my family that I was madly in love with my ex-wife's sister, but it never seemed to be the perfect time to drop that bombshell. In the meantime, sneaking around was surprisingly fun. I smiled as I realized that it was high time my family found out that Sarah was the woman of my dreams. I couldn't have known that she was chatting across the bar with Tristan at that very moment. Dirk. I had tried to scare her away with my crazy talk and maniacal laughing. I knew she would be better off without me in her life, everyone was. So when Violet's lightning bug green Prius pulled up beside the spot where I was still sitting outside the manor, I was stunned.
Get in,
she ordered me after lowering the car's window. Although I complied, I slumped in her passenger seat as the stealthy car quietly puttered down the street. My grand plans of revenge had been foiled, so now I felt lost and unsure what to do next. My sole focus while I was caged had been figuring out a plan to ruin my father. He had managed to steal even that pleasure from me. Somehow, even in death, he was still mocking me. Leaning my head back onto the headrest, I said to Violet, "I thought you were smarter than this."
I've never been overly logical where you were concerned.
Her semi-flirtatious words had me whipping my head to the side to look at her. Opting not to push her in that direction, I chose the irritated route instead. What kind of lady picks up a man who is fresh out of prison and openly admits that he is upset because his father died before he had a chance to ruin him? Shrugging her shoulders, Violet said,
This kind, I guess.
I was annoyed by her flippant attitude. I could be a homicidal maniac for all she knew. In fact, I had given her every reason to believe I was dangerous. It was irresponsible of her not to keep her distance from me. You should be more careful, I warned her, feeling oddly protective of the vulnerable female.
Wait. You're irritated with me for not being more cautious with you.
She turned her eyes away from the road to give me an amused smile. Yes, I answered, trying to pretend like my logic made perfect sense even though it was inherently flawed. Not willing to let me get away with anything, Violet nodded before saying sarcastically,
Thanks for the warning, but I'll take my chances.
I couldn't believe her. She was flirting with me and acting like she didn't think I was a true threat. She obviously didn't know what I was capable of, or what I had already done. You have no idea who you're dealing with. You're playing with fire. She pulled the car over to the side of the road and stopped so she could look at me while she spoke.
I know exactly who you are, Dirk. I've been here your entire life, watching you grow up and struggle to come to terms with your unique position in your family. I've stood silently by and witnessed you turn from a willful, obstinate youth into a strong, decisive, stubborn, angry, and utterly irresistible man.
My mouth fell open at her admission. I was unworthy of her blind faith in me. I always ended up hurting those closest to me. I didn't ever want to see the look of pain in Violet's eyes that my ex-wife had when I broke her heart. Needing to shut down her obvious crush on me before hope took root in my own heart, I said, "You should steer clear of me. I'm nothing but trouble and I don't want to end up hurting such a nice, sweet girl."
Who said I'm nice or sweet?
She waggled her brows suggestively, making my redacted. I was tempted to lean in and ravage her mouth with my own. It wasn't my fault she hadn't heeded my warning to keep her distance. Besides, I was a virile and incredibly redacted man. How much could I be expected to resist? Something held me back though. Violet was too special and fragile for me to lunge and redacted in the backseat of her tiny car. As if she could sense my inner struggle, she lifted her chin and said,
I'm not some innocent, delicate flower.
I chuckled at how her words contradicted my thoughts. Trust me. It's in your best interest to stay far away from me. I bring nothing but trouble.
I never trust a man who says to trust him.
She grinned, obviously enjoying herself. After a moment, Violet's eyes lit up with an idea.
I know exactly what you need,
she informed me before turning to ensure the driving lane was clear and quickly pulling into it. I sincerely doubted that this innocent, lovely lady had any idea what a flawed, lonely man like me needed, but I was intrigued to see where we were headed. My ever-optimistic redacted morphed into a redacted, as I hoped she might be taking me to her bedroom. When she pulled into a boxing gym, I turned in my seat to give her a questioning look. Really?
Yes, really.
She reassured me.
You need a productive way to work off some of this excess angry energy.
I have other ideas for how we can take care of that. I couldn't stop the suggestive words from slipping out. Not one to be outdone, Violet looked down at redacted and teased me.
Maybe later, if you're lucky.
The redacted that I had been working to control during our short drive returned in full force. Knowing that I shouldn't act on my naughty impulses with her, I said, "Now we have to sit here in the car for a while. I don't really want to step into the boxing ring with my redacted towards a large, angry opponent." She tipped her head back and laughed. I enjoyed the sound and it made heat shoot straight to my redacted. Pointing towards my redacted, I said, "That redacted laugh isn't doing anything to help matters here." Boldly checking me out, Violet surprised me when she openly flirted.
I've always heard that a man's life is sweeter when he has a great big redacted.
I wasn't sure how to correlate this forward, intriguing woman with the shy girl I remembered watching from the sidelines of Davis family gatherings, so I merely stared at her and remained quiet. Sensing my distance, she turned serious.
Okay, I'll stop hitting on you.
I tried not to let my disappointment show. Snapping her fingers with an idea, Violet suggested.
Let's distract you from any redacted thoughts by talking about your family.
That should take care of it, I quipped. She wasn't smiling, so I added, "What is there to say? My much older brothers are Daddy's precious twins who can do no wrong in his eyes. My twin nephews who are closer to my age won't give me the time of day. They think they're better than everyone, especially me. My wife and the man I thought was my best friend are now a couple. Oh, and did I mention that they just had twins? Can you guess how much I hate twins?" She sat there quietly and let me rant, apparently realizing that I needed to get it off my chest.
Are you done?
At my brisk nod, she started ticking off reasons why my burning jealousy was unfounded.
Your brothers do seem like they have their lives together, but they've had many more years to do that than you have. It's my understanding that they went through some serious rough patches when they were our age.
She arched a brow in my direction, which made me wonder what she knew about my perfect twin siblings that I didn't. I tried to get her to spill the details by asking like what. Ignoring my inquiry, Violet pointed to a second finger.
As for your nephews, their lives are complete messes. Ty's only focus is his career, and Tristan no longer has anything going for him. Anyone can see that.
I nodded, unable to pretend like Tristan and Tyler were in great spots, despite all of the advantages that had been handed to them on a silver platter. I was just getting ready to point that fact out when Violet indicated her third finger.
Regarding your ex-wife and friend, I think we both know that you are not an innocent victim in that love triangle.
The pointed look she gave me made me feel like squirming. How much did she know about my past? Releasing me from the hot seat, Violet changed gears.
Besides, I think you've been going about your plan for revenge all wrong.
Relieved by the new direction of our discussion and intrigued by her opinion, I turned fully to the side in my seat to let her know she had my complete attention.
I can help you change gears, but first let's go hit something,
she suggested. I couldn't stop the wide smile that spread across my face as I pondered this delightful and surprising woman. Nodding and reaching for my door handle, I told her, "I like the way you think." Tristan. Oh great. Uncle Dirk the jerk is here. I said the words somewhat under my breath, but they were loud enough for most of our gathered family to hear. I knew it irked him to no end when I called him uncle, since he was practically our age. Sarah smacked the back of her hand up at my chest and shot her eyes in my direction in a stern look that clearly said to shut up. Although I was vaguely aware that the alcohol still coursing through my veins was making my lips a little too loose, I felt powerless to stop it. What? He is. I defended my rude comment before going on. The whole family is here now. My eyes made their way slowly around the room. Dirk's entrance with Violet by his side completed the gathering of my grandfather's morning airs. I swayed a little as I perused the room, so Sarah put a steadying arm around me. I was still surprised that she had volunteered to come here with me. My shock was nothing compared to Ty's though. His eyes bugged out in our direction. He was obviously struggling to figure out what Sarah's connection was to me. I liked the idea of him believing that she was interested in me, rather than simply being here out of morbid curiosity and the desire to help stop me from acting like a drunken jerk, as if that were possible. Although I had managed for years to avoid being in the same room with my altruistic brother, we had suddenly been thrown together. From the way he was glaring in my direction, it was obvious that our tumultuous relationship hadn't mellowed with time. When Lexi sauntered into the room like she owned the place, Sarah had to physically hold me up as I wavered. Even after all this time, my invisible connection with Lexi instantly activated at the sight of her. Lexi's eyes locked with mine from across the room. I ached to pull her into my arms, even though I had given up that right long ago. Letting Lexi go had been the biggest mistake of my life. I had been a conceited moron, and I had been paying the penance for my teenage idiocy every day since. Sarah leaned up and whispered near my ear.
I called her.
My ever-hopeful heart silently prayed that Lexi had shown up because she harbored deeply buried feelings for me that would suddenly resurface at the sight of me. The practical side of me knew, though, that it was more likely that she had merely shown up out of concern that I might hurt her little sister. The alcohol in my system made everything seem muted, but I still managed to notice that our younger generation seemed to be the only ones adversely affected by grandfather's sudden passing. His children, with the exception of Dirk, who was our age, and Nana Janice, were relaxed and chatting amiably as if nothing was wrong. I barely contained the urge to yell at them in fury. Didn't they care that grandfather was dead? What was wrong with them? Ty, Dirk, and I obviously all cared because it was the first time we had all been in the same room with each other in nearly a decade. It dawned on my sluggish mind then that Dirk might just be here to see how he fared in grandfather's will. He had never seemed to care for any of us, so he was likely only here to claim his inheritance. As I looked around the room, I wondered how many of our relatives were in that same boat. Sutton Davis hadn't been an easy man to love. He was as stubborn, demanding, and arrogant as they came, but I would miss him nonetheless. It simply didn't seem possible that he was gone, and I was disgusted that our other family members weren't more upset by his passing. I was just getting ready to have an outburst about their complete lack of compassion over the loss of our family patriarch, when the only thing that could have shocked me more appeared. With even more than his usual degree of authority, my grandfather, Tristan Davis, walked into the room full of his mourners. Tyler. Sarah's hand shot up to cover her heart as we all blinked and tried to comprehend the commanding presence before us. What the redacted? I said the words aloud because it was the only sentiment that seemed to make sense. Tristan and I locked eyes. Our confused gazes left no doubt that we were equally perplexed by this shocking turn of events. After breaking my eyes away from my twin, my eyes darted to the other faces in the room. Dirk's stunned expression, as if he was staring at a ghost, made it obvious that he was as surprised by this twist as we were. When I looked back at Sarah, who had her arm snaked around Tristan's waist, obviously supporting him from drunkenly swaying, she was looking back at me. I valiantly tried not to read too much into the look of longing she gave me. I couldn't imagine what she was doing here with my brother. I didn't think I could survive a replay of me loving a Bell sister, who only had eyes for my brother. Forcing my attention back to the current matter, I worried that Nana Janice might have a heart attack from the shock of seeing her dead husband walk into the room. When I turned to her, I was stunned to discover that she was smiling as if she had known this was going to happen. Our other family members didn't look in the least bit startled either. In fact, they appeared as if they were in on this cruel trick all along. I couldn't imagine what would possess them to make us think grandfather was dead when he was clearly as strong and healthy as a horse. Glaring at my father, I spat, "How could you do this to us?" He held up his palms, clearly getting ready to defend their appalling ruse, but I wasn't ready to hear it. Holding up my own hand to stop his excuse, I turned my scowl towards each member of the older generation one by one before landing on my grandfather. "What the heck is wrong with you?" I asked him, certain that he had been the mastermind of this sick joke.
It was the only way to get you to all come together in one room.
His thundering voice normally intimidated me, but I was too fired up right now to cow down to his authority. I bugged my eyes out at the idea that he would fake his own death to get his family together. A cocktail party or meal would have worked, without all the melodrama. Nana Janice's bright eyes flared in my direction.
We've tried that for years. You consistently refuse our Sunday brunch invitations, even though attendance is mandatory for all family members.
I squirmed under her angry gaze because I knew her accusations were accurate. I always made excuses to not attend large family functions and holiday gatherings, and I knew from my mother's complaints about it that Tristan was just as bad. Dirk hadn't even wanted to come around when we were kids, so I couldn't imagine him voluntarily showing up now that he was out of prison. Our lack of attendance was no excuse for such a wild fabrication, though. Tristan proved he felt the same way as I did by mumbling just loud enough for us all to hear. Was a fake death really the best option?
Yes, it was.
Grandfather answered him. His voice was filled with confidence.
You're all here, aren't you? That's all we wanted.
Dirk shook his head, obviously still trying to come to terms with losing and regaining his father in a matter of hours. This was too much. What were you thinking? He seemed distraught and perplexed. His wary tone sounded as confused and hurt as I felt. Nana Janice's gaze didn't waver from Dirk as she answered.
We were thinking that we needed to get our broken family back into one piece. Our tactic to make that happen might have been drastic.
I couldn't stop the scoff that sounded deep in my throat at her acknowledgement that their scheme might have been drastic. Talk about the understatement of the year. Continuing as if she hadn't heard me, Nana Janice said.
But we felt and still feel that the end justifies the means.
Having heard enough, I turned to leave, hoping that Sarah would follow me. I've had enough of this. You people are crazy.
Freeze.
Sutton's booming voice stopped me in my tracks. Even though he was getting older and beginning to show the signs of aging, his authority was unquestionable. Jumping on their advantage while we were too startled to move or talk back, Nana Janice ordered.
You will stay and listen to what we have to say.
Tristan. I glared at my cousin Belle. She didn't look distraught over our dead grandfather's sudden appearance in the room. She and I had always been close as kids, so I was appalled that she would let our family pull this cruel trick on us. Focusing my anger on her was the only thing that kept me from coming completely unglued. If I thought about my parents' role in this setup, I would absolutely lose it. Belle took a half step forward and said,
Wait, you all let them think grandfather was dead?
The outrage in her voice was sincere, and I could tell that she hadn't been in on their conspiracy. So much for siphoning my fury in her direction. She hadn't been deceived like we had, but she also wasn't a part of their plan. Once I had a moment to process, it dawned on me that Belle was holding hands with our cousin Jonah. I screwed up my face at her. Why are you two holding hands? You're not a couple, are you? You're related.
Not by blood.
Belle quickly jumped in, which let us know that they were in fact romantically interested in each other. For some strange reason, my eyes sought out my twins again. It was like he was my only gauge of normalcy in this suddenly twisted mess that was my family. Ty's expression looked as disgusted by Belle's new love interest as I felt, which left me confident in my revulsion. Since the sudden death and reappearance of my grandfather was too much to cope with at the moment, I grasped onto Belle's inappropriate relationship as a focus of my anger. Jonah ran a soothing hand up and down her arm. I almost vomited in my mouth. Kissing cousins? I spat in her direction. Belle's face crumpled. She had obviously expected me to be on her side, but I wasn't down with redacted. Jonah glared in my direction. My dad married Belle's aunt. I was already born when the two of them met. I am not your Aunt Jessie's biological son, he reminded me rationally. But she has raised you since you were a young child. You and Annabelle grew up together as first cousins. I spoke just as calmly as he had, despite the raging venom boiling through my veins. The use of Belle's full name, which she hated, was the only indication of my anger that I allowed to surface. I would have much preferred to punch Jonah's dorky glasses right off his face. It was our cousin Katie who stepped forward as the voice of reason. She had always been the unofficial leader of our generation.
Jonah is my stepbrother.
She announced clearly, even though we were all aware of that fact.
I've given his relationship with Belle a lot of thought. At first my reaction was much like yours.
She admitted.
But now that I've had time to mull it over, I realize that there is absolutely nothing wrong with it, and I just want them to be happy, as we all should.
I couldn't believe Katie was willing to stand by and allow her brother to date our cousin. This was messed up. I said the only words that made sense. It's disgusting. My father spoke up then. He was a man of few words, so when he interjected, we always listened. If you had bothered to come around lately, you would have had time to come to terms with their relationship, like the rest of us have. And there it was. Somehow it was fine that Belle was dating her cousin, yet I was in trouble for not being here to watch it all unfold. This family is as messed up as they come, I decided before turning to storm out. I didn't care if Sarah followed me or stayed behind to stare at the carnage from my family's train wreck. My guess, by the longing gazes she had been directing at my brother, was that she would follow his lead. I didn't dare to hope that Lexi would leave with me. In any case, I just needed to get away. My grand exit was ruined by my mother's quiet voice. She was the only person who could have stopped me in that moment. She rarely spoke up at Davis family functions, so I knew this must be important to her. She didn't beg or demand that I stay. It was merely a request.
Wait.
I didn't have the strength to deny her. She was the one person I could count on to always do what was right. She was my moral compass, so if she was on board with all of this craziness, then I needed to at least stick around to see what she had to say. Little did I know, the madness was only beginning. Tyler. My quiet, reserved mother had taken control of this wild situation and was leading the conversation. We all stared at her, mesmerized by her calm and steady voice. She walked over to stand directly in front of Dirk. She reached a comforting hand out to his cheek as she spoke.
Dirk, honey, I know you've had a rough time figuring out where you belong. It's obvious that you miss your mother. We miss her too, but you need to open your eyes and see that the people in this room are also your family. We love and support you no matter what. We always have and we always will.
There was no denying the liquid glistening in Dirk's eyes at my mother's easy, gentle acceptance. He seemed unable to make eye contact with her as she offered him unconditional love. Instead, he turned to grandfather, his dad. I've done some truly terrible things, Dirk admitted, looking guilty and ashamed. I wondered if he might actually have a heart and conscience buried deep inside after all. It had never seemed like he did when we were kids. I had always been scared half to death of his evil, jealous glares in my direction. Grandfather absorbed his son's words, pondering them for a long moment. When he finally spoke, his words surprised us all.
We all have, son. The important thing is that you have paid your debt to society and learned from your mistakes.
At Dirk's brisk nod, grandfather turned to take Nana Janice's hand within his own before going on with his forgiveness.
Then your slate is wiped clean with all of us. No one here is perfect.
His words left us with no doubt that we were all to accept Dirk back into the family fold as if he had done nothing wrong. Grandfather's gaze traveled around the room so he could give each of his heirs a pointed look. Although I didn't know the juicy details of why Dirk went to prison, I wasn't sure how easy forgiving him would be. He had a long history of hating us that would be hard to forget. At the look of overwhelming relief in Dirk's expression, I made the snap decision to at least try to give him one last chance. My mother showered him with one of her signature warm hugs that could melt even the hardest of hearts.
I'm sorry that your marriage fell apart.
Her voice was infused with sincerity when she added,
You deserve to be happy.
Glancing in Violet's direction, she went on.
I think it's time for you to notice someone who has been quietly standing in the background, loving you and waiting for you to turn in her direction for a very long time. You both deserve to be happy.
When my mother placed Violet's hand in Dirk's, I was taken aback by the watery look of gratitude and bliss on Violet's face. How had I never before noticed her feelings for Dirk? I must have been so caught up in my own drama and busy with hating my twin that I didn't see what was right in front of me all along. For his part, Dirk looked as stunned as I felt, with a huge amount of giddy delight thrown in. His gaze traveled down to his fingers interlaced with Violet's, then up to my mother's eyes as if to confirm it was real, then back down to their locked hands, and finally up to Violet's love-stricken face. It was a startling and delightful moment for both of them. I was thrilled to be a part of it, especially for Violet. She had always been a steady and friendly face in the backdrop of our lives. She was so much more to us all than the housekeeper's daughter, and I truly wanted her to be happy. If she could find that happiness with Dirk the jerk, then I didn't want anything to stand in their way. As soon as the thought arose, I realized that I should probably stop thinking of my uncle as Dirk the jerk. He had always seemed like a complete and total redacted, but something about the way he was gazing at Violet made me hopeful that he might be able to change. Call me a hopeless romantic, but I felt inspired to root for him to succeed in revitalizing his life. It was past time for us long-time losers to start winning. My mother must have sensed where my thoughts had gone because she turned her attention to me next. Standing directly in front of me, she said,
You are such a sweet, sensitive, and caring young man. You will do anything for the people you care about, even if it's not in your own best interest.
I struggled with the burning lump in my throat, not wanting it to surface as tears. I wasn't used to having anyone gush over what a kind person I was, and something about my mother's praise made me feel like my emotions were out of my control. Her loving words made me feel completely unprepared for what came out of her mouth next.
Your generous nature and need to take care of everyone around you has made you blind to what is right in front of your face.
The solemn look on my mother's face let me know that whatever was coming next wasn't easy for her to say. With sincerity in her tone, my mom looked me directly in the eyes and said,
I'm sorry, sweetheart, but you married the wrong sister. Even though Sarah walked in here with your brother, she hasn't been able to take her eyes off you for a moment. That young lady loves you and it's time for you to give her a chance.
Sarah chose that moment to reach out to her sister. After placing Lexi's arm around Tristan to replace herself and steadying him, she walked over to where my mother and I were standing.
I couldn't agree more.
Lifting Sarah's hand to my lips, I gave her a chaste kiss. We beamed at each other, and my heart stuttered in my chest. I had worried for months how my family would react to my relationship with my ex-wife's sister, but Sarah was the woman of my dreams, and I wasn't going to hide my love for her any longer. Looking deeply into Sarah's shining eyes and not caring if the whole room heard, I said, I love you so much. Tristan. Smiling about Ty's love connection with Sarah, my mother turned her attention to me.
Son, it's high time you woke up and realized this lovely young lady has loved you since the moment you met.
Addressing Lexi, Mom said,
Tristan has made some horrible mistakes.
At Lexi's nod, my mother gave me a pointed mom stare that made me cringe before turning back to Lexi and adding,
He probably doesn't deserve your forgiveness, but you're here, so I'm guessing that's a good sign. For his part, Tristan may not have gone about things the way he should have, but he's in love with you. He always has been and likely always will be.
My mind was still reeling from my mother's announcement that Lexi loved me. It couldn't possibly be true, could it? And how much did my parents know about my part in Lexi's pregnancy and shotgun wedding to Ty? Almost of its own accord, my gaze darted to Lexi's. Her eyes were open wide and staring back at me as if they were magnetized to my face. She looked distraught, but I couldn't tell if it was because she was worried that I might believe my mother's wild fabrication, or if she was concerned that the truth was finally out. It felt like we were the only two people in the room as we stared at each other. Both of us were obviously in shock and trying to determine how the other felt. For the first time in longer than I could remember, I began to feel a glimmer of hope for my future. The liquor still flowing through my veins made me bold. My voice sounded croaky when I asked her in front of my entire family, "Is it true? Do you still love me?" I held my breath as I waited for her response. Lexi's head shook in vehement denial, but she didn't speak, and she didn't unlock her wide-eyed stare from mine. Her reaction almost seemed like she didn't want it to be true, even though it was. Sensing my only chance, I bared my soul to the only girl I had ever loved. I didn't care that my family was surrounding us. "I do love you with all of my heart, Lexi. I always have and I always will. I'm so sorry about the way I treated you when we were kids. I was such an idiot, and I've been paying for it every day since then. You deserve so much better than me, but I can't get you out of my head or my heart, and I never will. If you give me another shot, I promise that I'll spend every moment of every day for the rest of my life making you glad you did." It was a long, heartfelt speech. Lexi looked so beautiful as she searched my face for the truth. When she lifted one of her cool palms to my cheek, I allowed my face to sag into her touch. It had been so long since I had experienced the tingling sensation of Lexi's touch, and I instantly craved more of it. It dawned on me then that I didn't care a bit about my pride. The fear of having Lexi shun me in front of my family was nothing compared to the horror of living without her in my life.
Do you mean it?
Lexi asked me. There was no denying the hope that filled her gaze. Every word. My voice was barely above a whisper. "I'm so sorry. I know that I did some terrible things and that I don't deserve you, but that doesn't keep me from loving you with my entire being."
Oh, Tristan, I love you too.
Lexi wrapped her arms around me. Her embrace was better than any heaven I could imagine. I was finally home. Tyler. I had always known that Lexi was still in love with Tristan. Their public display forced me to confront their sizzling passion for each other that still thrived within their hearts. It was jarring and thrilling to discover that at long last I wasn't in the least bit jealous of them. My heart belonged to Sarah, and I truly wished only the best for our siblings. The love between Tristan and Lexi electrified the room with its intensity. Rather than growing apart during these years of separation, it looked like they had only longed for each other more. It didn't seem to matter to Lexi that my twin had abandoned her and left me to pick up the pieces. She was evidently going to let him waltz right back into her heart, as if he hadn't shattered it beyond recognition. If she was willing to forgive him, then I figured I could too. Sarah took my hand within her dainty one. The immediate jolt that raced up to my chest still stunned me, even though we had been secretly seeing each other for months. Needing to be honest, I said to her, "I didn't like seeing you show up here with Tristan."
I only came here with him because I wanted to be here to support you.
She responded with pure adoration in her gaze as she looked up at me. Sincerity rang true in her voice and in the soft expression on her face. My mind couldn't quite process this news. The wounds of constantly losing to Tristan evidently hadn't fully healed because my insecurities had resurfaced the moment I saw the two of them together. Was it possible that Sarah truly only wanted me? If given the choice, would she actually choose me over Tristan? It seemed too good to be true. In a bold and marvelous move, Sarah stretched up on her tippy toes and planted a tender and sweet kiss on my lips, right in front of my entire family. The brush of her lips against mine was filled with the passionate promise of delights to come. I pulled Sarah into a warm embrace and savored the feeling of her arms wrapping around me, claiming me as hers in front of everyone. My wild, fearless Aunt Jessie broke the silence.
You've got to be kidding me. Our family is going through this crazy swip-swapping thing again with another set of Davis twins?
I wasn't ready to break my warm hug with Sarah, but Aunt Jessie's outburst had me curious about what she meant. Tristan was the first to speak. "Again?"
Jessie.
Nana Janice hissed, obviously scandalized by her revelation. My eyes darted to my parents. They were bugging their eyes out at my aunt and uncle. It was suddenly clear that this foursome had some serious secrets of their own. Belle had a look of pure joy and obvious relief on her face.
You mean to tell us that our perfect parents had some scandals along the way to discovering their happily ever afters?
You might say that.
Her mother answered her cryptically before turning to gaze up into my uncle's sparkling green eyes, which were identical to my father's.
Do tell.
Belle encouraged them, her eyes alight with intrigue as she held Jonah's hand. It was my mother who shut them down.
That's another story for another time.
My father smiled down at Mom with the loving gaze that I was so used to seeing the two of them share. My entire life up until then I had assumed that it had always been easy for them and that they had always been in love. For the first time, I began to wonder if they might have had some hiccups along the path to their destiny. Confirming my suspicions, Dad said, let's just say that you're not the first generation of crazy Davis twins. But we're the craziest, right? Tristan's need to win managed to shine through, despite the fact that he was obviously tipsy. Grandfather's powerful voice was the one that answered.
We're all crazy. It's not a competition.
At that we all laughed with joy. The older generation had played a cruel trick to get us all together, but somehow it had worked out better than any of us could have imagined. We hadn't taken the safest or smartest routes, but it was starting to look like our generation of the Davis family might actually get to live happily ever after. Epilogue. Katie's date Miller was struggling to keep everyone around the massive table straight. It was his first Sunday brunch, and the Davis family was an overwhelming and boisterous group. For her part, Katie was enjoying putting him through the ringer. She indicated her father, prompting Miller. That one's your dad and he's your uncle. Miller pointed across the table, correctly identifying the men who still looked so much alike, including the relatively new, distinguished-looking salt and pepper patches in their hair. He's your uncle too, even though he's younger than you are. Miller correctly summed up Dirk. Proving to be an exceptionally good sport, Miller continued on around the corner of the table. This is your mom and your brother Jonah who is dating your cousin Belle.
You.
Belle scrunched up her face in distaste before glaring at Katie.
Is that what you told him?
Katie shrugged her shoulders and gave Belle an if the shoe fits look. Turning to Miller, Belle explained.
Technically we're cousins, but it's by marriage. We aren't any more related than you two are.
She used her strawberry-laden fork to indicate Katie and Miller. Leaning in as if to tell him a secret, Tristan said, they're kissing cousins, but you don't have to worry about me trying to steal my cousin Katie from you because I've already found the love of my life. He grinned down at Lexi before turning to give Belle a smug look and adding, outside of our family tree. Not one to be outdone, Belle gave Tristan a fake sweet smile.
That's so nice for you.
She batted her long black lashes before lobbing out her zinger.
How long has the love of your life been divorced from your identical twin brother?
For his part, Miller looked sufficiently uncomfortable as his gaze roved the faces around the room to gauge reactions to their family's wildly dysfunctional nature being on display for a stranger. Evidently not ready to stop the crazy train just yet, Tristan smiled and said, long enough for my twin to marry his ex-wife's sister. Well, Miller said. His eyes were wide open and fully engaged as he worked to process everything he was learning. Seeming to come to terms with it all, he turned to ask Katie, are your family get-togethers always this entertaining?
Pretty much.
She answered, leaning in to kiss his cheek to thank him for being such a good sport. Miller quickly turned his face so that her peck landed on his lips. Smiling down at her, he said, a man could get used to your brand of crazy. Surprising everyone, Janice picked up a cinnamon roll and lobbed it clear across the table in Sutton's direction.
Look what you've done.
Proving she had exceptional aim, the pastry thumped Sutton right in the middle of his forehead, momentarily stunning him.
Hey, what was that for?
The family patriarch frowned and rubbed his forehead as if the bread had injured more than just his ego.
You created all of these bad-mannered hooligans, and you've managed to talk me into staying here all this time.
Janice accused her husband. Sutton studied his wife over the thin rim of his glasses. He looked shocked and a little thrilled that she could still manage to surprise him, even after all these years. With eyes only for her, he said,
You almost left me once and I probably deserved it. That was the scariest time of my life, thinking that I might have lost you.
Turning to look at Dirk, he added,
But we gained a son in the process.
Returning his attention to his wife, he went on,
I'm the luckiest man alive that you blessed me by choosing to remain by my side as my partner for all of these years.
His expression shifted into an ornery one.
There's no one I'd rather have by my side or in my bed, as we raise these hooligans together.
He waggled his bushy white brows suggestively at her, which made her titter.
You.
Jessie squealed, cringing away from her parents' flirtation. Not wanting his grandfather to seduce Nana Janice in front of the entire room, Ty stood and clinked his champagne flute. Holding his mimosa high in the air, he announced, Sarah and I are having a baby. Cheers were heard all around as glasses clinked together. Truly happy for his brother, Tristan stood up as well. We were waiting to announce it, but now seems like the perfect time. Lexi and I are having a baby too. Janice clapped her hands together and squealed with excitement over the thought of having great grandbabies to snuggle and spoil before sending them home with their respective parents. The rest of the family waited to see how Ty would react to Tristan stealing his big moment. Proving that he no longer held any ill will towards his brother, Ty stretched his hand out to high-five with Tristan. Smacking hands with his brother, Tristan yelled, twinning. Dirk turned to Violet and rolled his eyes. Leaning near her ear, he whispered, Have I mentioned how much I hate twins? Violet's grand plan for Dirk to seek revenge on his family in the form of forgiving, forgetting, and living his best life was working, except that his twin nephews had still somehow managed to best him. She gave Dirk a soft look. He had been working hard to tame his rampant jealousy of his nephews and brothers. She knew that she had just the news that would cure his envy for good. Tipping her head towards his to share the secret solely with him, she told Dirk.
The in vitro fertilization took.
He looked deep into her eyes. The pure joy on his face was indescribable as he confirmed, Really? Violet nodded vigorously, the pooling tears threatening to spill down her cheeks. She knew that Dirk's knowledge of his low redacted had been a burden he had carried for a long time. In his mind, it was yet another way that he was inferior to the other males in his family. Dirk pulled her into a tight embrace, happier than he'd ever been in his entire life.
There's more.
Violet's words rumbled near his ear.
2 embryos implanted.
2. Dirk sounded confused. Violet could tell the moment he realized what this meant. Twins. She pulled back so she could see his face as she nodded. He looked every bit as stunned, scared, and ecstatic as she felt. For her ears only, he whispered, "I hope our Davis twins are girls." The beaming smile of elation he gave her left no doubt in her mind that he was just teasing. When Dirk stood and clinked his glass, he looked around the room and realized that this wild, wonderful, and wacky group of people was his family. He didn't need to compete with any of them, because he was one of them. This was his tribe where he belonged. Giddiness was clear in his eyes when Dirk announced to the room, "Violet and I are having a baby too, actually 2 babies." When the joyful roar of the room died down a bit, he turned to his nephews and teased them good-naturedly, "I win." Sutton weighed in on that proclamation. His voice was filled with finality when he said,
I think we all win.
Janice beamed at her husband from across the lengthy table.
Are you ready for the next generation of our family?
It was as if the two of them were the only ones in the room when he locked eyes with his wife, despite their physical distance from each other.
I think we had all better get ready, because they are on their way.
They can't possibly be any worse than their parents were, right?
Janice asked, chuckling at their inside joke. Tipping his head back with a bellowing laugh that filled the space with happiness, Sutton Davis said.
That's what we thought about the last ones.
No one seemed quite sure if Tristan, Tyler, or Dirk said it, but one of them quipped, "Buckle up, Buttercup, because the next generation of Davises are coming." Did you miss the stories about the first generation of Davis twins? Seth Davis is sweet and charming. Sam Davis is a brooding bad boy. Which irresistible brother will you choose? Find out now in Taking Chances, Making Choices, and Faking Changes. Are you curious about Dirk Davis? What is his backstory? Why was he incarcerated? Read more about him in Daring His Passion.